welcome to the Tuesday, June 25th, 2019 regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Please stand for a moment of silence and reflection. Thank you. Okay, we start each meeting with the opportunity for members of the public to come forward and speak to us about any issue that is not on the regular agenda. So if it's something that's on the agenda, you'll get your opportunity later. But if you've come here to tell us about something that you would like us or planning staff to know about, please come forward. We'll give you a couple of minutes to introduce that topic. Okay, seeing no one, move on. No committee reports. Start with old business. Text change, TC 618. Ms. Jeffries, you have something for us?
Feel free to speak. Okay. Well, all right. Text change committee was not able to meet for lack of quorum last week, so we need to ask for an extension past our current. Well, we've got until September 23rd. So is it staff's recommendation that, no, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong case. So yeah, a 90-day extension so that we can meet again at text change. So we need to make a recommendation to.
A motion and a second for a 90-day time extension request. Any discussion? All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? No? No opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Okay, Avon Ferry Corridor Study. Mr. Clem, good morning.
All right. So I passed out for you just an example of a recommendation statement you can make today. To bring you up to date, you've seen the presentation for the Avon Ferry Corridor Study a number of times now. There are many components for you to move along for recommendation to the City Council. In our last meeting, you directed us at the request of York Properties to look at the street plan amendments, specifically as they pertain to Mission Valley. And so we did that. The request was to look at a policy, framework, or implication for the construction of those streets in lieu of the street plan amendment that was recommended. And so what we did was looked at the small area plan section, so that would be Comprehensive Plan Amendment CP 1A19, which provides the zoning and land use guidance for any future decisions in the Avon Ferry Corridor. And one of them, APAF 7, is the policy that contemplates redevelopment scenarios for the Mission Valley Shopping Center, specifically pointing to the need for improved and high quality amenities for developments with more intense height and land use. So it kind of breaks it into these three figures of low, medium, and high density. And what we did based on your recommendation was we tied the figures APAF 1, 2, and 3, which are these three. They talk about appropriate design concepts to achieve the intended level of public amenities. And to that we included and street connectivity that warrant increased building height. And that would be used in the review of any future zoning and land use decisions, tying specifically to these renderings. And so for you to consider that, you would just, in your recommendations here, it has some potential language for you to consider. And that was the only outstanding issue or request that you had made of us. And here it is for you again, the recommendation you can make today. 3.3 here is the amendment to the policy language, and then 5.1 would be the removal of Mission Valley from the street plan amendment, if that is indeed what you are intending to do. Happy to answer any questions. Won't run through all of the parts. We've looked at them in great detail before, but if there are outstanding questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Right, thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Gary.
I found AP found the first of those three maps in the plan, and that looked fine with me, but I couldn't find the other two. Could you show me?
The other
2 and
two,
3?
street plan,
Yeah,
I can.
just so I can say I've seen it.
Sure. Have to. Quite a few hidden slides here. Okay. So this is one right here. Right there. So this is centrally located in the corridor. This is Gorman Street and Avon Ferry Road. And so down in this location is where the Avon Ferry Shopping Center is, where the Food Line and the DMV are located. Two of the future land use map recommendations that you considered and approved, one was for this area and one was for this area. So the increase in recommended land use intensity for those areas is linked with these street networks. So that's one.
That's on the Avon Ferry.
Yep, so this is Avon Ferry Road here.
Asking about Mission Valley. So,
Oh, okay.
So your policy language refers to APAF1, which I found,
Yep.
APAF2, which I didn't find, and
Okay.
APAF3, which I didn't find.
I see, excuse me. So that is these three.
Yeah.
Let me blow these up. All right. So figure APAF1 is a low density massing model, and then AF2 is the medium density, and then
Okay.
yeah, that should be
I
3.
think- all right,
Sorry.
they weren't.
Good catch. Yep, so it essentially lays out 3 intensity scenarios, and as you progress from one to the next, you can see that your open space and amenities
Right.
improve, and it's just conceptual.
Yeah, no, I did see those. I think maybe they weren't labeled in the document, or at least I didn't see it labeled.
Okay.
So, okay.
Yeah, we'll fix that too.
Any other questions for Mr. Clem? Okay, we've had our public comment on this at previous sessions, so entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I will move that we make the following recommendations for the Avon Ferry Road Corridor Study. 1, adoption of the corridor study report. 2, approval of the Avon Ferry Road Streetscape Plan. 3, approval of CP 119 area plan policies as listed on this staff document.
To
4,
clarify, that does include number 3, amend the APAF7 Mission Valley policy to provide support for street connectivity.
yes.
Great, thank you.
4, approval of CP 1B19 future land use map. 5, approval of CP 1C19 street plan, including the removal of Mission Valley from the street plan amendment. 6, approval of CP 1D19 future land use map. 7, amend the urban form map from Western Boulevard to Gorman Street with transit emphasis corridor to urban thoroughfare. And pleased to make this recommendation. It's an excellent study.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Good motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a second. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, rezoning Z719, Mr. Belk.
Good morning. This is the 4th review of this case. Of course, it's a request to rezone 1.55 acres from R4 to neighborhood mixed use with parking limited frontage. The South CAC voted, they actually voted twice on this proposal, and the most recent vote was 19-6 against the proposal. Well, this actually was the original vote, 19-6 against, at their meeting of May 13th. And that is incorrect deadline. No, I'm sorry, that is the correct deadline, July 22nd. It's coming up quickly. The applicant did submit revised conditions on May 30th. The South CC voted again on June 10th, 10-4, with 8 abstentions, I should add, against the proposal. Last time we met, the commission deferred the case until today to enable commissioners to review the video proceedings of the CAC meeting. The existing zoning map, of course, in an R4 area, the aerial view, shopping center at the intersection of Crosslink and Rock Quarry, a large duplex development, and additional retail at the corner. There is a large church campus, the Macedonia New Life Church, and predominantly single-family duplexes in the immediate area. Just a close-up of that. These are late 50s era duplexes, rather distinctive. The views from the street that you've seen, looking south on Rock Quarry. As I mentioned, the applicant did submit revised conditions on May 30th. These are the original conditions. There were 4 new conditions that addressed the concerns of staff regarding buffering, particularly outdoor lighting, and making sure that refuse storage and dumpsters and that sort of thing were located away from the residential property line. This zoning would provide for the additional retail or allow for the retail entitlement not currently extant in the R4 zoning. Of course, the applicant has conditioned out apartments and townhomes, so this is pretty much strictly going to be a retail, non-residential use going forward. Future land use map is moderate density residential, urban form. It is, Rock Quarry is a transit emphasis corridor. The comprehensive plan analysis, it is inconsistent with the future land use map, with neighborhood mixed use having the retail component as opposed to moderate density residential, which calls for densities of 6 to 14 units to the acre. However, we find it consistent overall with the 2030 comprehensive plan. I should note that the new conditions offered by the applicant have moved the policy LU 5.6 buffering requirements into the consistent column. The future land use map would change with the approval of the rezoning case. I should note that even with the future land use designations to the north at the intersection of Crosslink and Proctor, those are all commercial uses presently to the north. Approval of the rezoning would result in the comprehensive plan amendment, changing this from moderate density residential to neighborhood mixed use. There are no outstanding issues, and again, the deadline is July 22nd. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I would observe that at our last meeting, we held this so that the commission members would have an opportunity to look at the video of the CAC meeting that was forwarded to you. So hopefully you had the chance to do that. So we should be able to move forward on this one. However, Mr. Belk is here to answer questions.
Did have one quick question on that. It was still showing as inconsistent on the transition and buffering. There was one back there that I thought that, transition buffer zone districts. NX beside residential would still move it down there?
Well, it's basically going from low-density residential to commercial in this situation, so that was the reason that that policy was deemed inconsistent.
Other questions? Mr. Gary?
Just really a curiosity, the condition about no impervious surface on the east side of this site, do we allow parking on pervious pavers? Yeah. So could you have a parking lot on pervious pavers over there and still meet that condition?
I think the intent was to keep that as a buffer predominantly. As I understand it from the applicant, the plan for this parcel has been set, so the parking would more than likely be in the front. I'm not sure if the applicant is here to address that specifically, but in our discussions, the intent of that condition was to keep that as a buffer.
In the video, the applicant did speak specifically to the buffer area, and so the intent was to have that as a buffer. Anything else?
So I think it's probably just a technical change.
Microphone,
It would
please.
help maybe to
Microphone, please.
I think it's just a technical change, and we don't need to hold up the process here, but might help to clarify that the intent of that condition is to have no parking in that area, pervious or impervious.
Can we see the conditions again, please?
Yes, sir. The original and the new conditions.
For reference, as a data point, I do think that pervious paving is typically a lot more expensive than regular paving.
True.
So that's why we don't really see it.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
would note that this is summarized here, and the exact language does indicate that it does have a disclaimer on the end of it, unless otherwise required by the UDO. So that would be determined at the site plan stage. If any additional parking might be required, that would have to encroach upon that, but the intent here, again, is to provide that 75-foot buffer.
Okay, further questions?
Yeah, excuse me. I
Yes,
have
sir, Mr. Mann.
a couple questions. One of the main concerns of the CAC was traffic and adding access, or what were going to be the points of access to the site. One thing that I heard in the video, but I wasn't clear on, was the shared access point between the Family Dollar and the site. I thought I heard that maybe that could be a point of access coming from Family Dollar to the site, but it wasn't clear. And then also, was there going to be one or two curb cuts leading to the site? That wasn't clear either. And then the third thing was, in the future, Raleigh has a street plan for Rock Quarry Road being a 4-lane divided highway, where in the future, this site would only be right in and right out. Is that correct?
That is possible, and more than likely, I can't speak to that specifically. We have anyone from our transportation group here that could address that. The site, and I brought this slide up, the site currently has one existing curb cut. Whether or not there would be two, I believe that would be a site plan determination, as well as the cross-access with Family Dollar.
Right, okay. Because the main thing I was hearing was it moving from a commercial site that was ideal for this type of a business, going to a site that might create more of a nuisance traffic problem that might not be as ideal for a standalone restaurant.
Other questions?
I
Yes,
have a
ma'am.
question, and I apologize if I'm backtracking a little bit, but can you remind me why multifamily housing was eliminated as a possible development here?
That was again, the original condition. That was the desire of the applicant to have this site dedicated exclusively to retail, as far as I can determine.
Other questions? I'll entertain a motion. We have other business this morning, folks.
I'll make a motion. Do see that this case is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Although it is inconsistent with the future land use map, it is in a residential area where the future land use map wasn't updated in the most recent UDO change. Do take into consideration some of the concerns. It does seem like the majority of the concerns at the CAC were with the kind of state DOT right-of-way and traffic outside of the ability to do anything from the property owner. And it does also seem to fall in line with that little commercial center. And I think also the fact that the applicant has been very conversational and amenable to a lot of back and forth and conditions, and I think it is nice to see that they have been working with concerns. So I move approval of this case.
I would just state that if approved, it would change the future land use map. I know you said that, but we don't want to say from I believe it's moderate density residential to neighborhood mixed use. Is what it
Okay,
says in the staff report.
move approval of also including the update of the future land use map from moderate density residential to neighborhood mixed use.
And we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Ms. Jeffries.
I remain a bit conflicted about this case. I do believe that the applicant is making a best effort here to make it a palatable case. I am concerned that the neighbors still have some concerns, but at this point, I think I will vote for it, but I'm struggling with this case.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Stay tuned for how I'm going to vote, because I'm not sure. I think that the viability of this depends on that road improvement project, which is, as the chair of the CAC said, not coming soon. So if this road improvement had been made or were about to be made, then I think this site can readily be made commercial, but without that, I think it's problematic. So sounds like I'm going to vote no.
Okay.
I have a comment.
ma'am.
I'd struggle a little bit with this too. I'd have liked to have seen a little bit more of the transitions addressed. I think the applicant did do a great job, working with the neighbors and us with the feedback that we gave them to create more conditions. So I just wanted to point out that I struggle a little bit with the lack of those transitions, but I will probably support the case.
Okay, thank you. And I will lastly observe that a lot of the citizens' concerns had to do with traffic, and those are not issues that the site developer themselves can address, but will be addressed in time in some way. And that they did have support from the property owners abutting the southern area because of the things they were doing, and then the eastern area with a buffer proposed. So I think they've done what they can. And finally, the intended use, which of course we can't guarantee will be the case, would not have any morning business, which will not create any morning traffic, so it'll be more of an evening rush hour issue. Having said that, I'll now call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Okay, I see. Okay, we'll need a show of hands, please. All those in favor say aye. Please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Janitha, you have that? Okay. Motion approved. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving along to Z1019. Good morning, Ms. Ellis.
Good morning. All right, so Z1019 has been before you. It was about a month prior was the first appearance, and the commission chose to defer this case so that they would have the opportunity to go before the CAC. The case was at the South Central CAC last night. However, they chose to not vote on it because the case is close to the border of the South Central and the Central CAC, so it was the request of the chair that the applicant also attend the Central CAC to do a courtesy presentation, and that the two CACs would have a discussion together about the case to provide their feedback to the applicant. You may wish to consider a time extension if CAC vote is something that you would like to have prior to taking action on the case, since the deadline is August 12th, and we are running a bit short on time to allow for the CAC vote.
Okay, so we will need to request an extension.
That's correct.
Okay.
So moved.
We have a motion to request a 45-day extension. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to request a
That's
45-day
fine.
extension. Any questions? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Now, Ms. Ellis again, Z1119.
All right, so Z1119 similarly first came before you about a month ago and was deferred to this date to allow the applicant an opportunity to convert the case from what was previously a general use rezoning case to a conditional use rezoning case. The applicant has since done so. However, they submitted the conditions past the 10-day code required deadline, so staff was not able to review the conditions to provide and to incorporate those into the staff report per code requirements. I would suggest, if it's the desire of the commission, that an extension could be asked for to allow staff the appropriate amount of time to incorporate the conditions into the report and to do a review through all the departments.
Okay, we need a 30-day, at least a 30-day extension.
Second.
Motion and a second for a 30-day extension. Any questions or comments? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you, Ms. Ellis.
Thank you.
Moving on to new business, rezoning Z1619. Mr. Anagnost. I saw him earlier. Or see some conversation going on outside of the door. Someone do a quick check.
Hasn't met for this.
Then we will need to come back to this one so that we can have the staff report. Let us do rezoning Z1819. Well, I see Mr. Belk is not here. In this case, I will observe that Z1819 is both inconsistent with the future land use map and with a comprehensive plan. Normally, those are referred directly to the committee of the whole. Maybe we're hearing this because of time requirement that we hear it, but we do not need a presentation on this one. So,
A member of the audience here to speak on it.
okay. Well, let's hold back. Then let's circle back.
Okay.
Would you like a presentation?
Yes, sir.
All right,
We're
good
gonna
morning.
come
This
back
is
to,
zoning
Z-
case Z-16-19.
Thank you, John.
16.
Yes, that's correct, Z-16-19 at the west side of the 200 block of Fayetteville Street, just south of the Capitol Square, right in the center of downtown Raleigh. So the current zoning is a mix of 5, 7, and 12-story downtown mixed use with a shopfront frontage. The proposed zoning is downtown mixed use with a shopfront frontage and a 40-story height. And the Central CAC saw this at their June meeting. It'll be back at the Central CAC next Monday. All right, so there you can see the site. So it is most of the half block on the west side of the 200 block of Fayetteville Street. It does omit the Kimbrell's building there in the center of the block, and then a couple of the buildings on the corners. So here's a diagram of the existing zoned height, just to make that a little easier And so you can see the 12-story height is just the Oddfellows building on the northwest corner of the block. The center portion of the block is a 5-story height currently, and then the southeast corner is a 7-story height. I think you're probably familiar with the location, just south of the Capitol Square, or Union Square as it's been labeled. And then the Performing Arts Center at the south end of the axial street of Fayetteville Street, and then Moore Square Station to the east, and we are presently about 2 blocks west.
John, quick question. Can any rezoning be disconnected parcels?
Yes, so long as the property owners or an authorized agent sign the application, yes.
Oh, okay.
So here you can see it looking south on Fayetteville Street. This is looking towards the northwest on Fayetteville Street. And then a little closer on Fayetteville Street. And then from Salisbury Street. So most of these parcels do pass through from one side of the block to the other. So the proposal would increase the entitlement by about 8-fold due to the increase in height. The future land use map here is designated for Central Business District, so the downtown mixed use zoning district is consistent with that recommendation. And then this is also in an urban form area, the downtown urban form area, and so that would recommend an urban frontage such as the shopfront frontage that is offered. There is also a transit emphasis corridor on Salisbury Street, which would usually recommend a hybrid frontage, such as parking limited, but also in a downtown context could recommend an urban frontage. There is one condition offered that has 2 components to it. One component says that all of the majority of the historic facades facing Fayetteville Street would be preserved in any future construction on the site, but only above the ground floor. So basically from the top of the ground floor to the cornice line of what you see today. And then the additional part of that condition is that from that top point of the existing buildings, there would be a 10-foot step back before any new construction would begin.
So what's meant by most, that condition?
So it's everything except the building where there currently is the Big Easy restaurant, and I'll point that out for you. So everything facing Fayetteville Street, except for the Big Easy restaurant here, and then this non-contributing building here. The remaining facades would be retained above the first floor.
When you say above the first floor, what is?
So essentially, you draw a line like this.
Second floor up.
Anything below that could be removed during construction. Anything above it would have to be retained.
Second floor of the existing structure or second floor of the new building?
So it's just the facade of the existing structure must be retained. So anything behind that front wall could also be removed. So the site is within the Fayetteville Street National Register Historic District. It is not there is no local overlay district on the site. There are some local landmarks. A little bit more about the National Register District. It does have a pretty wide period of significance, almost 100 years, and a pretty broad range of architectural styles represented. And almost all of the parcels within the rezoning site contain contributing resources to the National Register District, with the exception of the parcel at the southeast corner that houses the subway. That is not a contributing resource. One thing I'll note from the nomination for the National Register District is this quotation about the first floor storefronts, and that many of them have been redone since the buildings were built Most of these buildings are from about 100 years ago. And so many of them have been redone, sometimes multiple times since then. Sometimes if a landmark designation, local landmark, is applied to the building, it is congruous with the historic character, but other times it is not. And so you'll notice in the staff report that the preservation of the first floor facades is not emphasized so much as the articulation and the rhythm that they provide, so that as you're walking down the street, you do perceive a regular interruption of the wall plane with building entrances, many of which are recessed from the right-of-way. The downtown plan does have a note that is relevant to this case. So it mentions using historic resources through adaptive reuse, but also retaining the historic identity. So overall, the case is consistent with the comprehensive plan, consistent with the future land use map and urban form map. You can see a number of consistent policies there, mostly relating to density, mixed use, pedestrian friendly street activation, proximity to transit. So that combination of factors in downtown is very desirable according to the comprehensive plan, and this case would allow all of those things. And then the inconsistent policies mostly relating to the potential for much of the historic fabric to be removed. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the Central CAC has not voted. They'll see this case again next Monday. And then the Historic Developments Commission did see this case at their June meeting and is scheduled to see it again at their July meeting, at which time they may choose to write you a letter with some comments.
Okay, thank you. Before we go further, I want to acknowledge that the Raleigh Historic Preservation Toolkit, which is referenced in the staff report, the firm I work with wrote the toolkit. I did check with the staff attorney for any conflict of interest. She indicates there is none, but if the commission feels that they would rather me not be involved in this discussion, you can vote accordingly. Just want you to be aware that I was involved in that document.
I'm fine with you staying in on the vote.
Okay. All right, good enough. Thank you. So questions for Mr. Anagnost regarding the case? I have one. I'll start. Tell us about landmark status and what protections, if any, that provides.
Sure. So there are 4 local landmarks excuse me, in the rezoning site. So those would be subject to certificate of appropriateness review by the Certificate of Appropriateness Committee of the Raleigh Historic Developments Commission. And so that would apply Raleigh's historic guidelines for historic districts or historic developments. And so those guidelines include limitations on the amount of additional height you can construct on an addition to an existing historic resource. There is, for a non-residential district such as this one, a little bit more leeway than what you would find in a residential district such as Oakwood. So in a district like Oakwood, it's typically 1 story or 1/3 of the existing height above the existing height would be allowed. There is a bit more leeway, but typically would not be more than, and there is additional guidance from the Secretary of the Interior, which our Historic Developments Commission uses as a resource. But generally, 40 stories would not receive a certificate of appropriateness if it's above a historic landmark, a local landmark in Raleigh. And probably you wouldn't see a certificate of appropriateness awarded for anything probably even approaching 12 stories. It's unlikely.
Okay, thank you.
And failing a certificate of appropriateness, what's the significance of that to us?
So long as it is a local landmark, any construction development plan would be denied if it could not be awarded a certificate of appropriateness. So the recourse that the applicant would have at that point would be to request a certificate of appropriateness for demolition of the historic resource, and which is likely also to be denied, but at that point it starts a 365-day clock set by state law, at which point they can just wait for a year and then they demolish. or they could request that the resource be delisted as a local landmark, which I believe would require action by the City Council.
Other questions?
I had a question, I guess, for planning staff, Ken or John, whoever, and maybe you want to think about this a little bit, but the city upzoned downtown a few years ago and came up with heights that it presumably thought were appropriate for different parcels downtown. And the outcome on these parcels was 5, 7, and 12, I guess. And I'd be interested in the thought process that went into limiting these sites to 5, 7, and 12 when other sites were allowed 20 or 40.
Take that one.
I believe this was a action taken during the remapping adoption with City Council, and I believe that preservation concerns were among the stated reasons for that. I would also take a little bit of issue with the idea that the downtown was upzoned. We went from a zoning category, the DOD, that allowed through site plan approval to request buildings of any height at all to specific height categories. The main difference being that there was a discretionary procedure, but of course any discretionary plan approval that goes through where the property is already zoned is technically a quasi-judicial hearing.
What I heard in that was preservation concerns.
Yes.
Ms. Jeffries?
So were these properties ever entitled in any way to 40 stories?
Again, through the site plan approval process under the downtown overlay district, you could have requested any amount of height, but there would have been certain showings that would have had to be met. Whether those showings could have been met with adverse impact to the historic properties is something that I can't say. It would have to be adjudicated in a hearing to review that. But technically there was zoning in place prior to the UDO that would have allowed a request for very tall buildings on these properties. But again, you had to go through a site plan process that had specific showings, and showing consistency with adopted city policies was among those. So whether that could have cleared the hurdle to approval is a question that would have to be adjudicated in that hearing.
I have a quick question. It's not often that we get a chance to look at a piece of property this large and significant right in the heart of our city with just one condition. And I just wonder what discussions did staff have regarding this one condition? Were there others, or was this sort of the first shot out of the gate?
So this is the first iteration of the conditions that we have received. The applicant has indicated that they would like to modify the conditions. I'll let them speak directly to that. When I've spoken with the applicant previously, I have discussed the articulation that I've noted before that I think would be helpful in terms of policy consistency in creating a streetscape that retains some of the character that's present in a early 20th century commercial walkable district. So that's one thing that's been noted. There has been also, and you'll see this in the staff report under the impact analysis section for parks, recreation, and cultural resources, and this has also been seconded by the transportation planning department, is that if you look on the map here, you can see that there are existing pedestrian connections from the Moore Square transit station through Exchange Plaza. You have a fairly continuous public pedestrian crossing or passage there, and then this, of course, is pending and would be on private property, but the Nexus development that has been filed for the News and Observer site includes a private drive that passes here or somewhere near there. And so one thing that's been noted is if this site had a pedestrian passage or some connectivity, that would create a continuous route for a pedestrian from Moore Square to Nash Square without having to walk along a street.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's been noted. And then another thing I have noted to the applicant is that the step back that's been offered, first of all, is probably still going to require the step back that is provided for in the Unified Development Ordinance, because the normal step back is either 12 or 15 feet, which the condition step back would not meet, and so there probably would be, there will be an additional step back required somewhere between the third and eighth floor, even with the 10 feet offered now. And so they may want to take into consideration simply offering a larger step back that could incorporate the code required step back, but that generally 10 feet or even 12 or 15 feet for this location is probably not going to be sufficient to retain the visual feel of those buildings in the way that it is today, that having a mass the size that it would be allowed by this zoning above those buildings and not be set back more than 10 or 12 or 15 feet is going to draw the attention of the eye if you're walking on the street.
Sure, sure.
Anything else?
Yep.
Are you,
No? Go ahead.
in that vein and discussions you've had, since we just finished our comp plan update, I remembered and went and found policy downtown, the 1.5, which encourages planned development districts for, with master plans for developments of this significance. Was that discussed with the applicant at all?
I don't believe so.
So I would suggest that that's a policy that might well be applied here to get much greater detail about what is intended on the site. And
Anything else? Okay.
I
then-
have one
excuse me,
question.
Ms. Davis, go ahead.
So they're proposing to maintain only the front facade of the building, and then everything from the width of the brick or whatever behind that could potentially be changed? Or,
That is correct. I will also note, because of the local landmarks, there would be the certificate of appropriateness review for the landmarks, and so there would be additional conversation through that review as to what could happen to the rear portions of those buildings. But yeah, for the non-landmarks, if this was approved as it is today, yeah, basically anything behind that front wall could be removed.
and what about on buildings where, say, the cornice, may turn a little bit before it terminates? Would that just potentially be truncated off?
The exact wording of the condition notes something along the lines of being visible to someone outside the building, and includes architectural components like cornices, but I would have to check the exact wording. My initial reaction to that is it's likely that could also be removed if it is beyond that front wall.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? We'll invite the applicant forward. We'll might set the 10-minute clock there. Mr. Bowers? The 10-minute clock for our applicant.
Excuse me. Good morning, Mac Paul, 421 Fayetteville Street. Here on behalf of multiple owners in the 200 block of Fayetteville Street. Just to give you a little bit of background, there is no pending or development plan on the horizon for this block. This case is about the mapping that occurred several years ago and what the appropriate heights are on the 200 block, and the owners feel that the 40 stories is appropriate in this block. Just as background, the city went through, as you may remember, a multiple-year process to convert to the UDO, and as part of that, they remapped all of the commercial properties in the city to new districts and assigned heights for the first time. There was a lot of attention paid to downtown during that process, and in fact, the city came back and did a second round of public comments and analysis of the downtown heights because there was so much attention on what was appropriate downtown. As the planning director mentioned, prior to the UDO, there were no height limits in the downtown overlay district. There were processes, there were standards over 80 feet through a site plan process. The other factor, and these properties were all mapped to 40 stories throughout the process of remapping. There were no comments in the public record about the 40-story height on Fayetteville Street in the 2 rounds of public hearings. At the end of that process, there was attention paid. There were multiple work sessions that occurred at the council level. Planning Commission heard all of these, the remapping. Of course, this was part of a large package that was considered and approved by Planning Commission at 40 stories. Fayetteville Street and in the concept behind that remapping, which is not really embedded so much in either the downtown plan that was done or the downtown element of the comprehensive plan, but it was this notion of wedding cake where the greatest heights were on Fayetteville Street, 40 stories, and it tapered down from there during the remapping. So for both the fact that the DOD had no height limit and Fayetteville Street was envisioned as the greatest heights, it was given the 40 stories. At the very end of the process, there were some concerns expressed at the council level about these historic, the National Register District, this block in particular. We're all, very familiar with the buildings on that block when we go downtown, and it's obviously part of the identity of downtown Raleigh. There were no real tools to deal with it at that time. It was at the very end of the process. There was a reluctance to pull pieces of the overall mapping out and evaluate them separately because it was the end of a term. We had a new council coming in December. So there were adjustments made at the very end of the process to this block and a few other properties downtown. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of public notice about that, opportunity for public comment, and as you might imagine, the owners in this particular block were not particularly happy when they learned about the changes that occurred at the end, which led to a dispute over the remapping of this block by one of the property owners. One of the positive things that came out of that was the city's opportunity to retain place economics, to start looking at how do we have some incentives. Raleigh is going to develop. We want greater height downtown, but we also have historic properties, and how do we balance those competing interests of economic development and character? There were a number of recommendations that came out of the study that was done. A lot of discussion that occurred about this particular block, and the net result of it was that in order to restore or to achieve the 40 stories, it does require rezoning. You can't just wave a magic wand. We looked at the tools, some of the tools in the toolbox, to look at ways to achieve that balance. And so that is what is encapsulated in the condition about the preservation of the facades. As noted, we do have some adjustments we're working on. We're getting feedback from RHDC staff, as you can imagine. And a couple of the things that we're going to be changing, one is the setback. As John Anagnos mentioned, we need to go further than 10 because of the UDO, so we're anticipating changing that to a 12-foot step back at the top of the buildings. And at the street level, the reason, as reflected in the RHDC nomination, there's been a lot of evolution on the first level, but what we plan to do is to tighten that up. We do not have any interest in changing the rhythm of the building and the facades of the building from the ground level up to the top of the existing buildings on Fayetteville Street. But the storefronts themselves, there has been a lot of change over time, so we're going to try to tighten that ground level just to deal with the storefronts, that the transparency and the entrances into the building, but not the actual structure itself. And so we've come up with some language to address that. The other thing, part of the principle behind this rezoning to 40 stories with the preservation of the facade is that it protect contributing structures. So our rezoning condition at this point, and we're still having some conversations, we're going back to RHDC in July, is that we had excluded several buildings from the preservation condition. One was the subway building, which is on the map there, non-contributing. But there were two other buildings, and there's still conversation going on about those two buildings. One is the Garland building on Martin Street, which has had a number of changes post registration of on the National Register, which probably would lead to delisting. So we had proposed to exclude that, still having some conversation about that building. The other building is the Big Easy. The Big Easy is a very interesting building on Fayetteville Street. It used to be a motion picture establishment back in the 20s, and it was at Eckerd's at one time. And there was a very different facade in that period. There were windows and uses that extended up the building. And at some point subsequent to that, it was either demolished or transformed in some way. So it's a one-story building, but it has a parapet that extends like 2 levels with no windows. So there's conversation going on about that. Obviously, it's part of the fabric of Fayetteville Street. The property owners don't like the idea of having the preservation of the facade for that building, and because of its lack of transparency and the changes that occurred. But we want to get some more guidance from RHDC about whether that is excluded or included with a facade preservation. So those are the things we're going to be fine-tuning with the conditions, and we will be going back to CAC in July and RHDC and getting some more feedback.
Okay, thank you. So, questions for the applicant?
I have a very quick question. Understanding that you need to go to CAC and RHDC, are you fine with extending this or delaying the vote on this today?
Yes.
And you know, I'm sure I would think we've got people in the audience, but I just wanted to preface saying that because I've got a pretty strong feeling that we're gonna have this come back to us.
Mr. Geary.
Yeah, I want to, repeat what I said earlier, that I think people in Raleigh, this is an important place in Raleigh, and so people are going to be startled to hear that we're considering a case that would upzone 200 block to 40 stories. And I don't know that we should reject that out of hand, but I think it would help to see with a master plan and some modeling with some precision what is intended. Just a general upzoning is pretty startling, I think, and goes way beyond anything I think I'm going to be able to vote for. So I'll just suggest that. I think a plan development district, you've got quite a bit of property here, so it certainly would lend itself to that.
Want to respond?
Well, I'd just say, as I preface my comments, there is no development plan. I would tell you some of the property owners have no intention whatsoever of redeveloping their property. The property owner that was the genesis of this case had just invested millions of dollars in renovating back to the historic character of their building. I hear what you're saying in terms of wanting to see what that would look like, and I would ask you to, one, look at this as what is the appropriate mapping for this property. And we would say that the 40 stories is appropriate and the condition provides some additional protection that wasn't available when the remapping process occurred. But secondly, since we've had to go through this exercise to rezone it to 40 stories, it does lead to a thought process of what would that look like. And for instance, Salisbury, there was some conversation about including the facade protection for Salisbury, but thinking, okay, if you're going to redevelop, it would definitely require assembling, combining some of these properties that are very small and narrow properties to achieve anything that would make sense. And, Salisbury Street is the back of all of those buildings on Fayetteville Street. It could, with the shop frontage, it could be a much nicer, engaging pedestrian environment than it is currently. But again, there is no plan to develop these properties. The owners would like to have the entitlement that they feel is appropriate in light of the comprehensive plan and other factors that we mentioned.
Ms. Hicks?
Pardon. I think as the case stands now, I would find it difficult to support. but I am encouraged that you are planning to have further talks with RHDC, and some of the things that you will talk to them about will help protect the historic fabric of that area. I think it would be really helpful to have a better understanding of how the feel of the massing of these structures can be maintained. I'm not necessarily opposed to additional height, but to be able to maintain that kind of original massing in some way, which I think potentially requires more than just the facade. Additionally, and I think related to this, having an understanding how light and air it would be protected so that the pedestrian experience on Fayetteville Street along there is not greatly affected, so that we don't have the sensation that there's these historic fronts and then just these tall buildings, you know, shooting out of them. I think there are ways to successfully achieve that, and I would look forward to seeing some more conditions that would address that.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay, we've got 2 minutes left for anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this. We have a couple of minutes available. Okay, is there anyone here who wished to speak in opposition to this? Please come forward. No? Okay, we will have a opportunity for, assuming we agree, to hold this so that we can get a CAC vote and get the RHDC comments. This would be a good opportunity to provide any additional guidance to the applicant, and I will offer some myself. I think that understand the 10 foot's going to be modified to 12 feet by UDO requirement. I'm not sure 12 feet is even the right number. I don't know what the right number is, but I feel like it's got to be more like 20 feet, maybe even 30 feet. And I don't know that without getting a sense of looking at it. So if there is a way to, through Photoshop or SketchUp or some other application, to show us what a street view would look like with a setback, maybe different setbacks, you might stand a better chance of getting support from us if we can see it and it makes sense. So I would offer that as a suggestion. Anything else? Anyone?
Well, similarly, I just offer one suggestion too. I understand the condition to maintain the character above the first floor, but I do think there's some significance, maybe not specifically in the architectural detail at ground level, but certainly in the way those buildings function at ground level. And I think it would be I think it would be detrimental to Raleigh if we had a long city block building without any character at ground level rather than one single entrance. Understanding there's going to be multiple entrances regardless of what happens, but I'm just as concerned at ground level to what that might look like. And I understand you don't have a project, but certainly there are block exercises, there are examples that can be presented, whether through modeling or SketchUp or certain discussions. So I would encourage you to try to address what's going to happen at ground level, because that's where the majority of us get our experience from when we walk down the street. And then I would make a motion that we hold this until we get a CAC vote and DHC vote as well.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We have an opportunity for further discussion. Mr. Geary?
No,
Do you want to give a date where you want to continue it to, or do you, I don't know if you could even.
Well, I understand that we have a schedule, a summer schedule that I don't remember all the dates that we are not going to be meeting, but certainly we want to hold it beyond the CAC and DHC meetings. Maybe staff can offer when we would be back here at the table after those meetings occur.
I think the next meeting that would meet those conditions would be August the 13th.
Do we have a sense of how long RHDC will take on this?
Sometimes they do take into a third month before they are prepared to submit their review. I think in this case, when we visited them in June, they did indicate that they would like to have something for you at their July meeting, but that they would want to see what the revised conditions are in order to be able to do that.
So in response to a specific date, I think that what we need to do is tie that to an action, and then with the understanding that our next available meeting could possibly, or the next earliest meeting is in August. So, my motion is that is contingent upon those two events taking place, with the absolute minimum being August 13th, just based on our schedule.
I'm sorry, point of clarification. Are we sure that Central CAC has a meeting in July? Because many times they take breaks during the summer.
CAC?
Mm-hmm. They're meeting in July? Okay.
Okay, and understand that if it comes back in the first meeting in August and we don't have all the resolution that we're seeking, we can of course defer again. So,
Right.
so the motion is to hold this at the table until August 13th. Further discussion?
Actually, I do, yeah, in the vein of suggestions, these buildings are zoned 5 stories, 7 stories, 12 stories. 12 stories is a nice number. 20 stories is a possible number as well. And with 40 stories, it's possible to condition the application down to something less than 40 stories. I keep hearing around town that these 40-story applications won't happen because above 32 stories, the costs go up. I don't know whether that's true or not, but we're presented with a kind of take it or leave it for 40 stories, but perhaps, again, I think a PD is called for here, but at least some detail about the scale of the application is needed.
Okay, anything else? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thank you. See you back in August. Now that brings us back to actually Z 1819. We did not complete our action on that. Mr. Belk, as we were racing around, we noted that this is inconsistent with both the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. So normally we would refer this directly to the committee of the whole. That is your recommendation?
That's correct, and I should note that it is also inconsistent with the urban form map.
Okay,
as
great,
well.
thank you. I believe there may be someone who came today who wanted to speak on this issue. If you just kind of raise your hand and let me know you're here. Okay, so we will have a lot of opportunity at the committee of the whole for public hearing, public comment. But since you're here, we would invite you to come forward and speak on this issue. And normally we ask the individuals restrict their comments to 3 minutes. So was there anyone else who came to speak to this issue? Okay, I don't see anyone else. So, ma'am, you're it. If you would just introduce yourself and tell us your address.
Hi, my name is Joan Levy. I live at 10 Ponderosa Park Drive in Wake Forest, North Carolina, which is a dead-end road that comes into Ponderosa Service Road.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm kind of opposed to this until there's a more thorough evaluation of the impact of the traffic. Currently, numerous cars use Ponderosa Service Road as a detour between Capitol Boulevard and the Falls of the Neuse intersection. And there are times in the morning I can't even get out. Yesterday, there were in the .25 section of Ponderosa Service Road, it's Ponderosa Service Road and Common Oaks, there's 10 cars per minute coming down that small section of road. And then there's school buses and some of our locals, and the increase of traffic of the townhomes, I'm not sure people have looked at the impact of that. And not only are there a volume of cars, they speed along the road, and then there's tons of potholes. So the other thing is that perhaps when Capitol Boulevard becomes a freeway, all the traffic from our section and this new area that you're going to do is going to be funneled out to that Falls of the Neuse, which turns into a Main Street at Wake Forest and Capitol Boulevard, which is already a mess at rush hour. It's impossible. It blocks up Forest Pines Road. So that's of concern. So if you could do like some kind of impact study perhaps on how that traffic is going to flow either immediately and or if you become a freeway. So that's my one thing. Second thing is that there was a letter in the file that the public can see that was written by Mr. Erlewine related to the meeting that we had on April 30th. It's the neighborhood notice meeting. He wrote a letter to Hannah, who is one of the planning committee people, and in it he misrepresented. And I sent an email to Hannah, to Mr. Belk, and to Mr. Erlewine complaining about the misrepresentation. And I don't know what to do about that letter that's sitting in there in a public file that does not represent what I was doing at that neighbor meeting.
Okay.
So take that letter out.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Levy. Mr. Belk, I have a question. To be clear, because I understand also we have a later case this morning, a comprehensive plan amendment, which also relates to Ponderosa Service Road. So the comments we just heard, would they be more appropriate for that or this, or I'm not sure I understand the distinction between the two.
The comprehensive plan amendment case does include these parcels that are part of this zoning proposal,
Okay.
plus 2 additional parcels to the north.
Okay.
So the concerns and commentary and our analysis really parallel in many ways.
Okay. Well, hearing that, since we're going to refer this case to the committee of the whole, so a little more discussion, but the comp plan amendment we will discuss later this morning. Ms. Levy, you may want to hang on for just a little while longer to be sure you have an opportunity if you want to speak to that once we have that discussion so that we understand fully your concerns.
Sure. I'll just say ditto, though, for the next part.
Okay.
Same thing I would say.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms.
Say
Hoffman.
procedurally, you know, I talked to Don about this yesterday. You might be able to give some more information, but if the future land use map, if the rezoning is to be inconsistent with the future land use map, it would be amended automatically. I think, and Mr. Belt can clarify, there's some additional parcels in the comp plan amendment that are not included in the rezoning, which is perhaps why they're separate.
Okay.
But it would still be under the purview when you look at the rezoning as well.
Okay, great. All right, that helps. Thank you. Okay, so then, having heard the public, and there was no one else who raised a hand on Z1819, we will refer that to the committee of the whole. That would not show up this week. We have items on the committee of the whole. Mr. Bowers, I'm looking to you for guidance. This would probably then necessarily go to our August committee of the whole?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so good enough. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to Z1919. Mr. Mabel?
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
So this is a request for 1 3/4 acre downtown from DX12 with a shopfront frontage to DX40 with conditions. So I'll also note that this has been to the central CAC but has not received a vote. And RHDC has requested review, which I can get into a little bit. And I'm anticipating being on their July meeting for the review. And your deadline is the 23rd there. So this is the site. It's a little bit hard to make out with all the DX. I find the DX the hardest to see, so it's in yellow here. Currently zoned, and I drew the boundary of the actual district, DX12 shopfront. So there's mostly other DX and with shopfront nearby. For some orientation, so this is in the upper left, the case we're talking about now. So this was Fateful Street that we just heard earlier today, and all the other zoning cases that are still pending before you. So quite a lot of activity in the area. So the site itself is adjacent to Union Station, across the street from the Dillon to the east and the Citrix building to the north. I drew the outlines of the depot district here, so you can see while it is not in the Depot District, it is, so the southernmost parcel on the block, which is here, is owned by the city and is a public plaza. And south of that is the Depot District, so this portion was an extension in 2017, I believe. But this block was studied for potential inclusion in the district in 2013, I think. So the RHDC is interested in reviewing the case. I believe that at least some of these buildings were deemed to be potentially contributing to the Depot District, although they are currently not listed either in the local landmark list or the National Register District, which is the Depot District. But that's the historic preservation aspect. These dotted lines are potentially where BRT will circulate in downtown. So this, obviously West Street down in this portion does not exist currently. And then the West Street is the two-way alternative, and the Dawson and McDowell Streets are one-way alternatives for the northbound route that will eventually be on Capitol Boulevard. This Martin Street connector, I believe, would be between the two, between Union Station and the Moore Square Station. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure where the thinking for the western boulevard route would turn north into downtown, or the southern route. I think those are still far enough away. We're not quite sure, but this is relevant because this site has been long envisioned as phase 2 of the Raleigh Union Station project, so to hold a local bus terminal, or a bus terminal for both local Go Raleigh routes as well as the terminus for some number of the BRT routes. I think still to be determined. So in implementing the Wake Transit Plan, which includes BRT and increased frequent local service, I think Go Triangle has planned to operate both the Moore Square Station and also an additional facility to handle all that capacity. So Go Triangle currently owns the site, and that is, by all accounts, what they plan to do with it. And I know the applicant has a presentation. I can go more into that. So this is from the site. There's the Union Station off on the right side of the photo there, and the Dillon building in the background. So currently, completely built out basically from edge to edge. This is the West Street side, so the Citrix building is to the right there. And this is the public plaza adjacent to the pedestrian entrance to Union Station. So conditions on the site limit certain downtown uses. There's also number 3 and 4. I collapsed quite a number of form uses, which I can get into if there were particular questions about those. And then number 2 is a condition requiring affordable housing. So this is the first one of these you have seen since the work earlier this year for the text change to pave the way for those. So I have some more information about that. So as part of this effort, staff in the planning department and housing and neighborhoods developed like a template condition that they thought would be appropriate for people willing to offer affordable housing requirement. So that has been replicated verbatim in this case as presented by staff. So they fill in the numbers where there were blanks. In this case, they are proposing at least 20 units to households earning 80% of the area median income with an affordability period of 10 years. And then the rest of the language is really about implementation and monitoring and the timing of construction, that sort of thing. So along with the template language, staff proposed a framework as a guide for applicants and also for decision makers about what would be an appropriate fill-in for those blanks. So there were a number of options based on the target of the median income and then rental level, affordability period, and the number of units. So with the 80%, which is currently what's in the condition now, shooting for option 1 there. The home rent is something set by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, so for the home program. So a lot of this is for monitoring purposes and things that Housing and Neighborhoods Department uses, and their sort of standard procedures when they fund their own affordable units. The idea was that a private property owner offering affordable housing would fold into that process, so it would be easiest for staff to implement.
So you've chosen the high home rent because the target is 80%? Is that right?
I believe so. I'm at this point reporting on the conclusions. I'm not quite sure of the background of all of the discussions between.
You didn't choose it.
That's right. So I did some math. So based on the AMI, which is there's many different median incomes. If you'd like me to talk about that for another 5 or 10 minutes about all the different ways you can measure median income, but there is a one number calculated by HUD also that they scale based on household size. So I just operated on the family of 4, which is in the middle of their range, to give you some idea of values here. So this first number was 80% and 50 or 60 and 50, right? And so then the second number are the high home rent and the low home rent for 2019. That's like the cap that HUD puts on what you can charge if you have a unit funded by home dollars. And then the last number is, so in the housing world, affordable generally means 30%, no more than 30% of your household income. So that number at the bottom here is basically the first number times 0.3 to give you a range of what would be considered affordable for someone earning that amount. Right. So at 80%, they would somewhere in the option 1 column. So the quite a big difference in entitlement from 12 to 40. So a factor of 4 in the residential units, assuming that the entire tower would be residential. I would just note that the retail in both instances just assumes a first floor retail. None of this assumes a bus station on the first 1 or 2 floors. Our, spreadsheet model doesn't have that as an option. So theoretically, some of that floor space that could be retail would be used up by the passenger terminal. So the request is consistent with the future land use map, inconsistent with urban form, which I can get into in the next couple slides. It turns out when you request 40 stories in the downtown West Gateway area plan with affordable housing on top of a bus station, that you trigger quite a number of policies. So I have 2 full slides of all the policies that support the request. A lot to do with housing, and then anything really related to land use near station areas got triggered. Some inconsistent policies. The urban form ones relate to setbacks. So there's a condition currently about parking area between the building and the street, a condition about pedestrian entrances, a condition about streetscapes. All those things are pretty close to what would come with a urban frontage, so the shop front frontage in particular. This case does not have a shop frontage applied, I believe because of the complications of building a bus station are in conflict with some of those, which is understandable, but there are some that are just missing. So a shop front frontage or another urban frontage would come with a build to, which is not represented, and also parking deck screening, a blank wall rule, so a couple of smaller rules. And so that triggered the urban form policies. And while I believe there will be, a bus station built here, there is no zoning condition promising a bus station. So, staff's approach to analyze the policies as what could potentially happen in the future made me lean towards inconsistent with urban form in this case. The infrastructure impact has a lot to do with the street grid and uncertainty there, and also some stormwater issues that were brought up by the stormwater reviewer, although that I believe would probably be eliminated at time of site plan. But and then the public realm amenity one was also from the Parks and Rec and Cultural Resources reviewer. identified this area as a high priority area for some additional public amenities, which are not included. So this is the location in the West Gateway area plan. So I use the new map because it's easier to read, although technically not yet adopted. So policy still in the station area core. Policies in this plan really pointing to high density, anticipating a transit station in addition to Union Station here. So the issues I mentioned, the CAC vote, RHDC, there is also a non-substantive technical problem with one of the conditions for enforceability, which I believe is easily rectified between now and probably the next time you hear this. And some dates. So Central CAC, I do believe, meets on the 1st of July, and RHDC is in mid-July, so the next time those things could be resolved and back before you would be the 13th of August. Any
Okay.
questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mabel. Questions for staff on this?
Well, this may be better aimed at the applicant, but do we expect to know before we decide this how many residential units will be in this project?
I think their answer for you is going to be not yet. So how I understand their process is they are still looking, they've issued an RFP for a developer, and they're still in the process of selecting that. So I imagine we won't know until that's further along what the proposal from the developer is as to how many. So they've set a minimum of 20 units in the condition as sort of a floor.
Yeah.
So any proposal going forward at this point would at least have that many. But in terms of the overall number of residential units, no, not yet.
Mr. Lowell?
A quick question. You showed us some staff recommendations for different types of, or different levels, if you will, of affordable housing. Was that shared and reviewed with the applicant? And if so, can you share that conversation with us? Because obviously 20 units doesn't even get close to
Sure.
any of these numbers.
Right. They were aware of the framework. Obviously, they used the template language. This was vetted through Growth and Natural Resources a number of times, and then I believe the council, full council, at least once. So the idea was to provide some options. You can see, at different income levels, so the more affordable you go, staff is considering of an affordability period that's less, and also a number of units that's lower, so sort of a balancing act between
No, I
the price.
understand.
Right.
I'm just curious. It may prompt another question to the applicant. I was just curious about your conversations, during the process.
I didn't know. We don't have any before they submitted the case.
Okay, all right.
Anything else for staff? Yes, ma'am.
So, since we've never really dealt with a bus station before, can you write a condition that says a bus station must be placed on this property?
I don't know. I think that would probably be
That's why I'm asking.
our
'cause
recommendation.
You said it's not conditioned, but I didn't know if it
However-
could be conditioned.
So, just first, I think as a practical matter, yes, you could write a condition that says the ground floor has to be occupied by a bus terminal. The issue would be for the transit agency if something were to unforeseen circumstance where the bus facility did not move forward, they needed to dispose of the land, that would obviously be an encumbrance for the potential buyer if they're not a transit agency, because they would not want to buy the land if they had to place a bus facility on it. So, given that this is land owned by a transit agency bought with FTA, Federal Transit Agency money for a transit facility, I think we can feel reasonably assured that the transit facility is a core part of what they're proposing.
Following up on the
Sure. I would say my response would be the inverse would be easier to do. So to say, a build to would apply except for areas that are a bus terminal. So should, their federal money disappear somehow and they are no longer able to do that and have to sell the land to some other buyer, then that zoning condition would kick in. would probably be the better course of action to address the urban form issues. Seems totally reasonable from a policy point of view. So a bus or any transit facility being a significant public amenity, I think some leeway in the urban form is appropriate and could be conditioned so that it wouldn't apply to areas that would make it hard to actually build a bus station.
Anything else? Okay, let's invite the applicant to come forward and present the case, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe here on behalf of the applicant Go Triangle, who's also the landowner in this matter. I'd like to start by saying that we are not requesting a vote by this body today, but we do expect to be back before you in August, hopefully early August, and we'd like your vote then, as we are under some timing restraints. And at that point, we will expect to have had our vote by the Central CAC, as well as refine some of the conditions and be ready to move forward. Ira's covered a great deal of the overview here, so I'd like to just focus on what I think will be some key questions. At its core, this project is, of course, Phase 2 of the Raleigh Union Station and a ground floor transit facility to complete the vision of this being a multimodal area of the city of Raleigh and downtown. Page 6 of your staff report notes that this Rust Bus project, which is the name it's accumulated over the past few years, is a critical component of the Wake County Transit Plan, of the Go Triangle's provision of routes throughout the city, and for BRT terminus throughout the city. This project is a culmination simply of many stakeholders, not the least of which is the city of Raleigh and others throughout the Triangle. The station will take up about 2 floors of the ground floor area. So on top, Go Triangle wanted to explore what else could be done to fulfill the city's vision of this being a true mixed-use multimodal facility. And we looked at uses that would complement that ground floor transit. In order to do that, Go Triangle realized it's a transit authority, not a private developer. So they embarked upon an RFQ and RFP process to choose a development partner to help them with this overbuild. And during that RFP process, they identified 4 key goals that are on your screen. Number 1, first and foremost, to develop this bus facility to expand transit options in the city. 2, to create a new mixed-use multimodal campus. 3, to deliver affordable housing as a required program element of this facility. And 4, to serve as precedent for future joint development projects in the city. Now, due to timing pressures in the market and our funding, we're seeking this rezoning at the same time we're going through this developer selection process. So while we have answers to some of the city's questions and community outreach, there's not everything that's been designed at this point, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. But based on these initial RFQ respondents, which we released earlier this year, we've received about 7 different teams interested in this project from around the country. We narrowed down those 7 responses and issued the RFP to 4 of those teams earlier this month. And based on those initial responses and the meetings with the city, which we've been having for several months, and feedback from the community, we filed the conditional use rezoning seeking the change from DX12 shopfront to DX40 with conditions. Now, those conditions respond to the various concerns we've heard in our city meetings and stakeholder meetings with the community. But at its core, this request is designed to provide important public benefits, and that should be the focus of how we shape the conditions as we move forward. Those public benefits are significant in that we're providing this public transit facility, but we're also providing this first case with the voluntary affordable housing conditions. And we want this to be a case that not only is successful, but is able to be built in the long run. We're also in the middle of the brownfields process, so there will be brownfields remediation on this site. And I'd like to explain some of those conditions just briefly and then go into some detail and leave time for questions. As Ira mentioned, there is an affordable housing condition. It is meant to follow the city's template, but to be a floor. And through the development process, we're hearing back from these 4 selected developers' teams about what more can be done beyond this floor and still survive in this market. We do have a list of prohibited uses, as well as a list of historically appropriate building materials that we've incorporated as more of a palette to respond to the historic warehouse area. We've also limited building use type and limited the streetscape requirements, both of which I'll get into in just a minute. The maximum of 40 stories in height is included because, as you know, the limits are between 20 and 40 stories. And what we heard under the code, there's no in between, that is. And what we heard from those 7 respondents was that in order to deliver this true mixed use and deliver the affordable units on top of a two-story bus station, 20 stories simply wasn't enough. Whether they needed the full 40 stories is something that we expect to hear back from, and we fully expect to condition this 40-story limit down, but do not have that revised at this point. I do expect by the time we come back to you in August, we will have that condition down further. Ira hit a lot of the comprehensive plan policy statements, and I won't belabor the point except to note that there's a significant amount of consistency that relate to housing affordability, expansion of transit options, and providing height and density in the appropriate areas throughout the city. The inconsistent policies mainly relate to those designs that make it inconsistent to have a ground floor bus facility and areas that we could really address at site plan once the developer is selected and able to really give better treatment to what those frontages might look like. I won't cite each of these policies, but in short, they note that the transit, height, and density policies all work together and they dovetail with the affordable housing condition. And that is, if we want people to be able to deliver affordable housing, we should do it in the areas of town that are close to transit, and we should do it in a way that allows height and density to make these projects realized. I would note that there were some concerns about height, because I know you all have had a lot of 40-story requests. There is a specific policy that relates to transitioning down of height in adjacent neighborhoods. And I would note that we are not adjacent to any single-family neighborhoods. We, in fact, are adjacent to Raleigh Union Station and the large rail yard. And so there is an ability to find consistency there. I've used the older map, the more colorful map of the station area, and you can see the project there with the red star in the larger yellow of the station area core. This map, as Ira explained, was from 2013, but still identifies a lot of policies that focus on building transit in the area that you're going to have most of your density. And the small area plan has specific guidance for that, including the vertical mix of service, retail, office, and residential uses that we plan to incorporate into the development through this RFP process. As Ira explained, we are proud to be the first case to offer a voluntary affordable housing condition since the council changed the UDO in April. We filed our zoning application the next month, and we did use that template language that we were invited to use. We looked at several different combinations of how these percentages or of AMI and of units would look. And we included some specific guidance in the RFP to that end. First, that affordable housing is required to be part of this element. The RFP responses will ask specifically about the condition that we've placed in the zoning condition, and we expect to have some feedback on that next month as to whether the developers and how the developers believe that this condition can be strengthened. Now, to your question, Mr. Lyle, the 20 units was selected because there are a list of prohibited uses but not required uses aside from the affordable housing. So we don't know if the developers are going to come back with 200 units or 150 units, and so including a percentage of units would somehow give a little bit, we were concerned it would give an illusion of a sliding scale. So we wanted that 20 units to be a minimum, and then hopefully our proposals will come back with 200 where we know 10% is 20 units or 15% and the like. So we started with this combination really to stimulate the conversation with those developers for they can give us that real market feedback of what will work here and what will make this a project that is able to deliver the affordable housing. And it's important on our time frame to be able to do that in a way that this project can be realized. Just quickly covering the frontage, as Ira mentioned in your staff report, we mimicked the shop front as best we could, and that includes the type of streetscape using the main street and mixed use. We've also included the 50-foot street-facing entrances and spacing, no parking between the buildings and the street. And the only area where we're not able to commit to at this point is the build to. And that is because we don't have a design, we don't have the developer selected, and we need to leave them the flexibility in combination with this area of what could be salvaged. We just don't know that at this point. And finally, our timeline. Just briefly, we've owned this land for 15 years, and it was bought originally for a transit facility. But we received a letter from the FTA that because there was some federal funding tied to this, they expect this rest bus facility to go forward by June of 2020 or face some significant consequences. We received that letter. We embarked on the RFP process. The city helped us secure a $20 million build grant that has some federal requirements tied to the design and delivery. And we've been before the CAC earlier this month. We hope to come back before the CAC and the Planning Commission and get positive votes from both bodies in August to be able to move forward to City Council and on to site plan by the end of the year, so we can hit that deadline. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Wadler.
I was going to say, that was well timed.
Not her first rodeo.
Lots to cover.
Okay, well, questions for Ms. Wadler? Mr. Gary? Excuse me, Mr. Mann. Go ahead, you have the microphone.
He always looks to me first. He should look that way.
You're a frequent flyer there, Bob.
I saw, and you answered the question about the 20 units, and you gave the reasoning behind it. But I saw 10 years for the amount of time for affordable housing. How did you guys come up with the 10-year period? I didn't know. I've seen emails going from the public back and forth about this. And one of the questions, and I had the same question, was why 10 years and why not something a little bit more permanent and more longer?
That's a good question, and we explored that with the Go Triangle Board a bit. We wanted to provide something that was workable for the developers to work from and make it clear that it was a floor. There's been a lot of interest, and some are interested in units, some are interested in the length of time, some are interested in AMI. But obviously our interest is in delivering a package that delivers all three of those that will work together. And so we thought just picking a single option from the city's memo might send a signal that it's just this option. We wanted to invite them to kind of mix and tell us which portions of these options will work best in the market. So we picked the 10-year as a floor, but if the AMI is adjusted, that we expect that 10 years to kind of go either way on the spectrum. It really depends on what we think the developers are able to deliver. But it's certainly, again, it's a floor and it's something that we're willing to revisit, and we expect to have feedback from the developers next month on that.
Okay. Mr. Gary.
So there's a little lump in my throat because this is the first offer, voluntary offer of affordable housing, and so I'm very glad to see it. And I hope that the terms of it will be strengthened as we go forward. I hope your developers can figure out how to offer more than 20 units if there's a substantial residential component, a longer duration, and perhaps various AMIs. But at least this is the beginning. And I think I'm going to quote you accurately as saying, if we want affordable housing downtown, we need to put it adjacent to transit and allow additional height. But to me, we should not be allowing additional height adjacent to transit without affordable housing conditions offered. So I think this is a great beginning, and I look forward to this being an example for other projects that come forward.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant?
I had a few.
Go right ahead.
I'll jump around a little bit here, but I'll be looking forward to seeing the RHDC comments when they have a chance to review that. I think even though this isn't in the officially in the historic district, it's really important to maintain the context of the warehouse district, which is kind of slated to really lose its character pretty fast. So I'll look forward to what feedback they have to offer. And see what y'all can do with it. Sort of aligned with that, I think the shop frontage is also really important there. And perhaps it can be linked to some language that gives you the flexibility you need for the bus station, but also, you know, provides some protection moving forward. I'm also I'll be interested to see a little bit more about Parks and Rec's comments about additional amenities, that being a high priority area. So I'll be looking for that. And additionally, some longer term commitments to affordable housing seem like a really important component of this project. And I did also want to say that I think this is a great start to providing affordable housing, and I commend you for, you know, making that commitment, which is clearly not an easy one, and you're blazing some trails here, which is much appreciated. I think that's it. Thanks.
If I could just respond to
Sure.
a few of those. I didn't mention, but Ken mentioned it, that the federal funding that's tied to the bus station, the build grant, will require a negotiated agreement with the state Historic Preservation Office that will likely pick up a lot of these things that we're talking about, the materials that are preserved, how they're preserved, how the frontage. So even though we might not end up having a condition with that, there is some extra protection there kind of built into the structure, and that the city can have some assurances that at the site plan stage, when the developer has been selected, there will be some real teeth to that. And then I just noted on the Parks and Rec, we are immediately north of a city-owned plaza that's directly between Raleigh Union Station and this Russ Bus site, and would look forward to discussions with the city about how that might be used in the future.
I would follow up on one item that has been mentioned a couple of times, and that's the shop front. And I don't know if it's reasonable to ask, but perhaps you can discuss with staff if there would be an appropriate to have a condition that if a bus terminal is not provided, that shop frontage would be applied. I don't know if that's possible. Check that, because in the event that going forward something happens, and who knows, we want to be sure that this property does at least take a shop front requirement with it. So see what you can do in that regard.
Thank you.
Anything else for the applicant?
I do have one additional comment. I'll also be looking for something in the conditions that talk to or speak to connectivity to the Union Station Plaza. I think having a direct link between that and the bus station is really critical. I think about folks coming in with luggage or whatnot, and just having that path be as easy as possible, and also attractive, and to make use of the plaza that's there.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Okay, let us invite the public forward. We've used up our in favor of time. So anyone here wish to speak in opposition to this case, please come forward. That's the language we use, so.
Mr. Chair, my comments are both sort of for and against.
Understand.
So, and my name's Karen Ringe. I live at 1543 Sunrise Avenue in Raleigh. I'm also a member of the Raleigh Transit Authority, and I also sat on the Downtown Raleigh Transportation Advisory Committee. And so I wanted to offer a few comments about the need for this facility. I know that there are some folks who've questioned whether or not we actually need a bus terminal there when we have the Go Raleigh Station, formerly Moore Square. Absolutely, for the connectivity for future, current and future rail, we absolutely do need a bus facility here. The vision for both the Wake Transit Plan, the long-term plan, and also the Downtown Transportation Plan assumes that we're going to need bus connections for train riders on that part of downtown. It will be a much smaller terminal. I think we're talking about 6 to 8 bus bays, as opposed to the many more that are in Go Raleigh. Go Raleigh's not going to go away. And in the Downtown Transportation Plan, there's been a lot of conversation about how do we connect these two transit facilities downtown, east-west. So, and as staff talked about for future bus rapid transit, while the plan does not yet know, we don't know yet exactly where the BRT is going to be, there will absolutely be some kind of frequent bus service coming in and out of that part of town to connect to the train station. And not even just the train station, it's just as things develop around Nash Square. There will be some kind of at least 15-minute bus service, but whether it be BRT or not. And also, I appreciate some of the comments today from you about about that facility connecting to Raleigh Union Station. The station really can't have shops in front of it because it needs to have air circulation for the bus terminal that's going to be underneath the building, and there absolutely should be connection with with folks coming in and out of the train station, so that it's clear to them where they need to go to catch their bus to the other parts of town. I did want to speak also to the affordable housing proposal. We're very delighted that Go Triangle recognizes that affordable housing must be part of this proposal. I am pleased. I guess I'm used to saying we since I used to work with Wake Up Wake County, but I don't anymore. But having worked on these issues for many years, I know, and listening to the public, the issue of affordable housing is of prominent importance, and as you probably all know, this has become part of the political discourse today in our city, and the need for it is growing ever greater. In fact, actually, the greatest need for affordable housing in the whole county is really 30% of AMI and below. I would, while I commend Go Triangle for doing this, they even did a study that HRNA, I believe, did for them to look at the different options. And how much sort of return on investment would be lost by going to lower AMI. This project, this land was purchased with public money, and it is very unique from any other project we're going to have from private developers because this is public money, and we ought to be showcasing and setting a standard for future development that's going to come of what should be done. So I would encourage both Go Triangle and for the city to look at certainly way below 80% AMI, or at least a mix of ranges, and perhaps even more than that. If I had to choose, I would choose for a longer period for guaranteeing that the housing units are being guaranteed as affordable. 5 years is nothing, and 10 years is nothing. This really ought to be more in the range of 30 years because once we get past that year, it is no longer affordable, so there is no longer a public benefit. So we really need to be thinking long term. So if I had to choose, I would say longer term and a higher AMI, if anything else. And then the last thing related to this is, as you all probably are aware, there's certainly a lot of conversation going on in the community about future bus rapid transit and how is that going to affect how is that going to affect gentrification and housing needs? So, and while the city and the staff is absolutely looking at connecting transit and affordable housing, not just here but throughout the city, which is the right thing to do, because this is the first project, in the broader context of concerns about BRT, we need to get it right here. I mean, this is downtown. This is not New Bern Avenue. This isn't Capitol Boulevard. This is right downtown, and we really need to get it right. So I'll stop there and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? Ken, clock. In opposition to this? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the table. We do not have CEC vote or RHDC vote, so we have every reason to hold this, plus we've asked the applicant to come back with some additional thought, and we are waiting to hear what they can actually present in the way of conditions due to their RFP. So in every indication, we would hold this at the table.
So moved. If we can add the similar language, I guess, that we discussed earlier. I don't know that the timelines for RHDC and CAC will coincide with our next meeting, but you know, it could upcoming our meetings the 13th, 27th, or 10th, and even RHDC has another meeting August 20th, which would be past our August 13th deadline. So I'm inclined to defer this to August 27th to make sure that those meetings are fully completed and have that opportunity.
Let me just observe, it was, the applicant pointed out there is a time crunch that they're experiencing.
Right.
So we ought to plan to hold this as soon as we can and hope that the others meet their deadlines.
Thanks for pointing that out. I understand it. Yeah,
Okay.
Agreed.
A second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to hold this at the table until our August 13th meeting. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll see this again in August. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, Mr. Belk, we come back to Ponderosa now with a comprehensive plan amendment.
Thank you again. This is CP 519, a proposed amendment to the future land use map that involves 6 parcels in the vicinity of Ponderosa Service Road, changing these designations from the current office slash research and development to moderate density residential and community mixed use. It's about a 23.5 acre area. Should note that the North CAC has not voted on this request. The map here shows the parcels. Note that the parcel I'm sorry. Apologize for that.
That's not helpful, Don.
Okay, it gets back to show. Okay. Always pays to rehearse with this machine. I wanted to point out that one of the parcels of the 6 in this proposal, one of the parcels has a split designation. If you look at that top map, you can see that there's one parcel that is split between moderate density residential and office research and development. So one parcel is partially within this request since it already includes that designation. Existing zoning presently is under county zoning, and it's also split zoned between Wake County R30 on the western portion and Wake County Highway District, or HD, on the eastern portion. There is a very small area of City of Raleigh zoning of R6 at the extreme western end, but I would note that that is completely encompassed by mostly floodway and a little bit of floodplain, so it's really not a factor. The existing urban form map, Capitol Boulevard, is designated as a parkway. The site is located near the intersection of Falls of the Noose Road and Capitol Boulevard, and is quite near just across Capitol Boulevard from the town of Wake Forest. Dominated really by the Wakefield development to the north. The Wakefield Commons shopping center adjoins the site to the north. There is an apartment complex also to the north. To the south, there is a manufactured home park. A little closer in, that is the Ponderosa Park that we have mentioned earlier. The Wakefield Hills condominiums, and I mentioned the Wakefield Commons shopping center there to the north. We did find that this proposal is consistent overall with the 2030 Comprehensive Plan. There are 4 consistent policies to point out, as you see, with zoning and infrastructure, location of growth, density transitions, and housing variety. 2 inconsistent policies that we noted, given that this area is designated for office slash research and development. These are considered employment categories. So the policies of planning for the tech sector and preserving industrial land were a factor here in that this would remove land from those categories. However, this request would affect just over 3% of the office slash R&D designated areas that are in this vicinity, and also south of the office/R&D areas is about 400 acres of land that's also designated in an employment category for general industrial. So even though that these are technically inconsistent, the removal of those designations affects a very small percentage of that area. There are some outstanding issues to note. I mentioned that this proposal, that 4 of the 6 parcels that are included in this amendment request are presently under consideration in the zoning case Z1819. Also, when development occurs, there would be a greenway easement that would be dedicated, and this would extend the Richland Creek, or extend, the easement would incorporate the Richland Creek Greenway corridor, and the area would require annexation with future development. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding this request.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Belk?
Can you pull up the site plan, the zoomed out view, if you will? I know we talked about properties to the north quite a bit. Can you show where the access to Capitol Boulevard is to the south? I believe, is there not 2 accesses to Capitol Boulevard to the south of this property?
There is one access here.
Right.
And then I believe that may be the only one until.
There is one further south of that that comes in just below the quarry, right?
Yes.
And I'm just pointing this out to some of the members. I'm pretty familiar with this property. My office was in Wake Forest for quite a while. Most of that property that was discussed as being, I think you said employment, but I think we all look at it more industrial. And I guess we don't have anything further south, but there is a stone/rock
That's
quarry
right.
property to the south.
Hanson Aggregates.
Is that all of the 400 acres that you talked about, or just a portion of it?
I would have to look at a map. I believe it comprises a great majority of that, yes.
And the only reason why I point that out is it's more likely not to stay as a quarry, not be used for other industrial purposes, but that's just a comment. And then if you go to the north, there's a loop road, if you will, that goes around the outside of Wakefield Commons, and you'll notice that there are several intersections along Falls of the Neuse Road there with access to Falls of the Neuse Road. There you go. And further to the east of that, you know, there's another spine road that cuts through, and to the north of that is Rex Hospital. So there is access to the north of Wakefield Commons. There's a shopping center and a hospital in that quadrant there. I point that out because it's important to understand those points of access, but the traffic is pretty difficult in the morning. If you haven't traveled on this road at rush hour, I can tell you it's literally a parking lot on Capitol Boulevard from 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning. Even though you have all those points of access, traffic is, you know, something we want to consider.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Gary.
I had might turn into a substantive question, but it's procedural at first. There's 6 lots here. Can we say yes to part of this and no to part of it? Just for example, if we wanted to say yes to the moderate density residential but no to the community mixed use, could we do that?
Yeah, I think what you could do is recommend approval of some of it, and because city council will ultimately decide. So you can say recommend approval of these comp plan amendments for these parcels and not for others. But I'd also keep in mind that this might come up again with the rezoning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
Only other comment I had is I'm, once again, really curious to hear what the CAC vote is. So I would make a recommendation to hold this at the table until we hear those CAC comments.
We'll hold that thought. We have, thank you. In this case, do we have an applicant for this? Is this I'm not sure if this is city?
Yes, Yes, sir, this was a citizen-initiated.
Okay, so, all right. But we may have people here who wish to speak on this item. Before I invite them forward, Ms. Hoffman, I should have asked this earlier. I apologize to my commissioners for not. We have rules about the comment in terms of time limit. I think earlier I said 3 minutes. I think it may actually be 2 minutes. Do you recall what our procedures are? Just in the interest, if there are multiple people, we want to be sure everyone has a fair chance to speak.
Yeah, under your rules, you can allot 2 minutes per person.
2 minutes
if
per
you'd
person.
like to.
Dang, I thought that was, I misspoke earlier. Okay, so I guess we should allow public comment in favor because this is a city initiated. So if anyone is here who wishes to speak, Ken, you have some hesitancy?
Just petition initiated.
Petition, okay. Well, I'm trying to be clear in the procedure on this. So it's petition initiated, but we would still have public comment. We would do pro and con.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Appreciate all the help. So anyone here who wishes to speak in favor of this, again, we'll have 10 minutes collectively, 2 minutes per person. And
Right there. Okay. Thank you. Good morning. My name is David Brown. I'm a landscape architect and planner at Withers Ravenel. I'm here with my colleague Kelly Race, who's a traffic engineer. We're here representing the applicant, which is KB Home, on this request. As Don has done a very thorough job outlining the issues here, the possible benefits. And I did want to follow up with Mr. Geary about his comment. The area in red may be your concern, I take it? The amendment to move some of the community mixed use south?
It's a more dramatic move. I don't know if I'm more concerned about it yet.
Okay, so in that area, I think the reasoning was that if we made the moderate residential, what we would end up doing is isolating a little bit of the office research development north of us. And the idea being that we didn't want to just have that little orphan piece of blue land use on the map. And the idea was, well, we already have red, we have yellow, we're just taking everything and shifting it a little bit to the south. Where it says community mixed use on the map right there,
Yeah.
that was the reasoning behind it.
Okay. All right.
okay.
And we are happy to come back. We did present this case, the zoning and the land use amendment in May to the CAC. They needed the staff report, so we did not attend in June. The staff report's now ready. They don't meet in July like a lot of the other CACs. So we'll be probably back at the end of August would be my guess.
Okay.
If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Clock?
I have one question.
Clock?
So the community use area, you have no interest in as residential?
No.
That is correct.
Okay. None.
Okay.
None whatsoever.
Yeah. Like we may be back in a month and they say we now want it back in, but at the moment, there is absolutely zero interest.
Okay. All right, is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of this? Okay. Anyone here who wishes to speak in opposition to this? Ms. Levy, welcome back. Again, just for the record, name and address.
Hi, my name's Joan Levy. I live at 10 Ponderosa Park Drive, Wake Forest, North Carolina. And I have concerns about the immediate impact of the traffic load if this becomes a dense property, as well as the future traffic, which will be abominable if Capitol becomes a freeway and everybody's funneling into that small area on Falls of the Neuse.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in opposition? Okay, bring it back to the table, Mr. Geary.
So I had a question for David, if he would. The designation of part of this site as community mixed use is with the intention of expanding the shopping center?
We have no plan for that property. We don't represent those property owners. When we met with staff, we all noted that there would be essentially an isolated piece of the research and development land. The guidelines don't call for a land area that size, and that was the intent was to bring the plan forward with the community mixed use traveling south of Common Oaks. This
Okay,
piece
so,
right there.
but that, you don't represent the owners of that,
It
of
was,
that property?
I believe, a good-hearted effort of good planning that would, to also include those parcels in this effort.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have,
David,
yes, sir.
quick question.
Yes, sir.
I know that to the west, kind of a long, narrow piece of property, there's a creek and a pond and a wetland, so to speak, down there. Do you know what percentage of the property is in that?
Is at least 30%. And one other thing that we should mention here, that's a very timely question. This is in the current county watershed. It's also in the city of Raleigh's urban watershed. So there's a 40% tree coverage on this 19 acres. The western portion of this property would be a great candidate because of the floodplain and the creek. Most of the trees are on the western end of the site. And the freeway that our neighbor has mentioned also is looming large in all of these discussions. It's going to cause some substantial changes to this part of Raleigh.
So the developable area of this parcel is fairly minimal, if I'm not mistaken.
I would say 50% developable at best.
Right.
So you can imagine it would be a very small, concentrated neighborhood on the eastern portion. The comments that were associated in the zoning case, we are happy to bring those back with some good adjustments next time in August.
Thank you.
Okay, we're awaiting feedback from the CAC on this, which I think would be important given that there's some complexity to this case. So,
Well, I
think
mentioned
Joe-
that I was gonna offer one up, so I guess now's a good time. Thank you. I would make a motion that we hold this at the table until we get a vote from the CAC, which would push us back, I believe, to our August 13th meeting.
It probably should be the second meeting in August due to the CAC calendar, if we may, please.
That's fine. That would make it August 27th, I believe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
okay, we have a motion and a second to hold this until August 27th. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now, yes, thank you. Okay, Mr. Belk, I think we have you again for Comp Plan Amendment CP 619.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. This is another citizen-initiated request to amend the future land use map. In this case, changing the designation from rural residential to moderate density residential. Portions of this request includes portions of 3 parcels totaling approximately 102 acres, and the Northeast CAC has not voted on the request. These maps showing the existing designation versus the proposed change to the flume. I should note that technically these properties are bifurcated by I-540, but none of the portions east of I-540 are part of this request. The current zoning on the property, it is City of Raleigh zoning. A portion of that is in agricultural productive, with the remainder under R4. However, the entire area is in either agricultural or forestry use. An aerial of the site showing that there is a good bit of vacant land and scattered residential, some neighborhood development to the east and, of course, to the west. It is along the Neuse River. There is a pedestrian bridge across the river along the Neuse River Trail that parallels this site. The Buffalo Road Athletic Park adjoins across the river to the west. Large church, Wake Chapel, directly to the south, and you can see the extent of the vacant and agricultural lands around this site. It's near the interchange of I-540 and Buffalo Road. we found that there were a number of, that one consistent policy that we found and I apologize, this is an error. This should read inconsistent overall with the 2030 comp plan. Inconsistent overall. We did find one consistent policy with location of growth. The site is within the city's ETJ. It does have water and sewer available. The inconsistent policies dealing with connectivity, it's a very constrained site in that regard. The development at freeway interchanges, although the street plan does call for an avenue connector, this would be extremely close to the existing exit. And then also 2 environmental protection policies we found inconsistent was protection of water features and floodplain conservation. As far as outstanding issues, the area would require annexation if developed in order to obtain city services. Also, a greenway easement would be dedicated to connect to the Neuse River Trail. As you saw in your materials, one property owner has provided written objection to the request. I would be happy to answer any questions. I
Mr.
believe
Belk.
the applicant's representative is here as well.
Mr. Belk, excuse me, could you go back to that consistency, inconsistency? In the staff report, it says the amendment is consistent with the following comprehensive, it says location of growth. I'm sorry, I did not see this sentence. Never mind. You were correct. Okay, questions for staff? Ms. Jeffries.
Yes, I thought I had a note from the report that says it's inconsistent with comp plan.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I've got it, yeah, for those policies, got it.
That's correct. It is inconsistent overall. I apologize for that error.
It says, does say consistent on that slide, so.
Yes, that is an error.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And as you point out, we did get a letter of objection from one of the property owners clarifying an important point. Anything else for staff on this?
Well, I'm inclined to vote against this, but the location for growth is appropriate, so what kind of growth are we anticipating there? If not moderate density residential, then what, low density residential?
Currently designated as rural residential with the active agriculture and forestry. Comp plan suggests R1, a very low density residential in this area.
Very low, okay.
Okay, anything else for staff? Okay, so
We've got the wrong case up in front of us.
okay. So, again, I want to be clear on this. We have an applicant. See, I know we have someone nodding affirmatively.
Yeah, it's just like a reason. So you hear from the applicant, then you can get both sides, the same 10-minute.
Fine. These comp plan amendments sometimes confuse me. I've only been here 6 years. I just, it just takes a while. Give me a few more years. Okay, then let us invite the applicant forward to present the case. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. Michael Birch here on behalf of the applicants, and I just want to note on the front end, we anticipate filing a rezoning for a portion of the property that's subject to the future land use map amendment. It's that one kind of in the middle of the 3, the Chapel property. When we included all 3 of these properties in the future land use map amendment process, it was at a time where there was still uncertainty as to how the city was going to handle cases that were inconsistent in terms of, is the whole comp plan being amended or is it just the map? Obviously, we've gotten clarity since that time. And also since that time, when we initially filed this, we were told that we could, always take property out but couldn't add property in after we filed. And since there's only 2 filing deadlines, we were kind of overly broad with the request. We know that the pools prefer not to be included in the future land use map amendment request, and so we will amend our request to exclude their property, which is the southernmost of the 3 properties that's highlighted there. And we should have done that already, but we will do that before we come back. And so we anticipate our request would just be for those 2 properties, the 2 northernmost properties. As Don mentioned, we have not yet been to the Northeast CAC. We are waiting to kind of file our rezoning request and then kind of pursue both of those together, both with the CAC and then with the Planning Commission and City Council as well. We anticipate filing that rezoning either late this week or next week. And then going to the Northeast CAC in August and September, again, on both the future land use map amendment and the proposed rezoning. I know Don kind of got to the merits of the case, and y'all have heard some of that. I'll touch briefly. Ultimately, our ask is that Planning Commission defer consideration of this until the August 27th meeting. By that case, we'll have been to the CAC once. We expect to ask for an extension of time at that time because the deadline is September 23rd, which is a day before your meeting on the 24th, and that's the meeting by which we would have theoretically the CAC vote that second Thursday in September. But would ask to come back for August 27th to have that discussion then of an extension. But I'll note just on the merits as you're thinking about this case that while it's currently designated rural residential, since that time that the future land use map was originally adopted, you know, it was kind of started being put together in 07, 08, ultimately adopted in 09. Since that time, the city has run the Neuse River sewer interceptor up the east side of the Neuse River to serve this side of the river. And the extension of that sewer interceptor certainly, you know, identifies that the city is expecting this area to grow at a density greater than just 1 unit per acre if they're going to extend municipal services into that area. Second, there is the greenway here as well with the pedestrian bridge over, which would provide access to the Buffalo Road Athletic Center as well. And so there has been a large amount of public investment in this area to serve the public in terms of parks, greenways, as well as municipal services. And again, we are located in close proximity to the interchange of Buffalo Road and 540, a major transportation carrier to get folks, whether it's to RTP into the western part of the county or to the eastern part of the county. So again, just given that y'all have heard the staff report, I wanted you to hear at least from us as to kind of what's prompting this request. I'll also say there's been a significant amount of growth in this area over the last 10 to 12 years. Much of that has occurred in the moderate density range, at 6 to 14 units per acre. Usually it's in that 7 to 9 units per acre range, both kind of small lot, single family detached, as well as townhome development. So, but we'll look forward to have that discussion, you know, with that conditional use case when we come back. So, thank you. So just 2 items: we're removing the pool property from the application, and then also requesting that this be deferred until August 27th. But I know the pools are here and have been waiting, and probably wish to address y'all as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just a quick question. The pedestrian bridge over the river, is that going to connect to your rezoning site?
Let's see here. So the pedestrian bridge is there, and there is already, I believe, a trail on that side. And I believe there's already a greenway easement on the property as well.
Okay. So yes.
Yes, the answer is yes, and we would anticipate, again, as part of the rezoning, having a discussion about how we provide connection from the development to the greenway. Yep.
I have a question for you as well. If you're going to be pursuing, and you are pursuing a rezoning, and if the rezoning were approved, it would come with a comp plan amendment. So why are we pursuing?
That's right. So
tracks?
again, initially, we were looking at a large area for a future land use map amendment. Again, when we were looking at that, those are just kind of 3 landowners. We kind of stopped on the southern edge where you get into much more, additional landowners. Also, currently the rezoning is just going to include that middle portion. So it's the Lewis property, the Chapel property, the Pool property. As of right now, the rezoning would just concern the Chapel property, that middle one. And so at a minimum, we felt it appropriate to include the Lewis property to our north, since that adjoins property that is designated moderate density residential. So there'd be that kind of continuity of moderate density residential and not kind of this one part between rural.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, we have a little bit of time for anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this proposal. Okay, then we will invite anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this to come forward. Ken, you'll check the clock. And again, we would, by our rules, ask for 2 minutes. We have 10 total. If you can operate within that time frame. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Sandra Poole. My property is 7111 Blue Run Lane. And that pedestrian bridge, by the way, is on my property. Okay, and I have some comments here, and I'll try to keep it 2 minutes. On May 14th, at the neighborhood meeting, I was asked by the lawyer from Longleaf Law Partners if I wanted my property included in the submission to change the future land use map designation, and I said no. I learned he included it anyway. I called him about this, and he said he should have reached out to me, but they were pressed for time to get the submission in by the deadline. He said he would remove my property from the submission the next day and call me, but I never received a call. You have a copy of my letter stating my wishes not to be included, and as I understand today, he is going to remove that, and I appreciate that. I do not think these properties submitted should be moderate density on the future land use map. If you were to see the beautiful Blue Run Lane area, you would see why this lovely country area should not be designated for moderate density residential. It has been put on the map correctly, rural residential. It is a beautiful farming area. My grandparents and parents farmed what is now my property. It is currently being farmed, and I plan to continue farming it. When 540 split my parents' farm, Blue Run Lane was designed as a service road to get to my mother's home. Blue Run Lane is not adequate to serve approximately 180 extra homes. Also, there is no stoplight when one enters or exits Pine Drive at Buffalo Road. It would be too close to the existing stoplight, which is only a very short distance away at Buffalo and 540 on the west side. It is already difficult to enter and exit at certain times of the day. Also, there could be a problem for emergency vehicles. There is a BP station across the street from Pine Drive, which further complicates traffic flow.
Ms. Poole, just hold just
Yes.
1 second. Is there anyone else who came to speak to this issue in opposition? Could I entertain a vote to give Ms. Poole some extra time?
I'll make a motion that she get an extra 2 minutes.
Thank you.
First and second, all in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed?
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you, but
That's
continue,
okay.
please.
Thank you. Thank you. If this area is developed, I wonder about the impact on the Neuse River. We need to be sure the river is protected. Development will run wildlife even further away. Their habitat is slowly but surely being destroyed. And it is such a pretty sight to see the deer and turkeys strolling along the fields. Sorry. All of my life, I have looked forward to being on the land that I enjoyed while growing up. My husband and I looked forward to moving into my parents' home, formerly my grandparents' home. We wanted to move from the congested NC State area and come out to the country. We have not taken any steps toward that because of this possible rezoning. The moderate density residential will change this peaceful area completely. I'm asking you, please don't do this. Leave the future land use map the way it is, rural residential. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poole. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, again, I will offer anyone else who wish to speak in opposition to this case. Okay, we'll bring it back to the table. We've had a request from the applicant to defer this to make some adjustments. Deferred to August 27th meeting, at which time you'd have a chance to either get additional information or request a time extension.
Joe had done that, right? But
No.
okay.
Joe didn't hear this.
So I'd like to make a motion to defer this case to the 27th of August Planning Commission meeting to provide time for the CAC to vote and for additional conditions or changes to conditions be made.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
And we have a motion and second. Further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. And I will note, just for the Ms. Poole, that when we bring it back the next time, we would not necessarily have public comment at that time unless we vote to open it up again for public comment. Does not, but please, I would certainly invite you back. Just understand, if you come back, there may not be an opportunity to speak. So thank you for reaching out to us.
Mr. Chair, may I also point out that I recommend that you attend the CAC meeting and make your concerns known and bring anybody else that feels the way that you do along with you. So I encourage you to reach out to the neighbors in the area to get a full discussion at the CAC meeting.
Okay, thank you. Let's move along. Comp Plan Amendment CP7. Mr. Anagnost.
All right, good morning. This is CP-7-19 for Sumner Boulevard. And there are two elements to this comprehensive plan amendment. First of all, it is initiated by private citizen. And there are two elements, one of which is to change the designation of the proposed street, which today does not exist, but is proposed to be a 4-lane avenue, to change that designation to a proposed 2-lane avenue divided, and then to change the alignment somewhat. So here you can see the segment. It is proposed to connect Capitol Boulevard with Old Wake Forest Road and to connect the currently disconnected portions of Sumner Boulevard. So the one on the east side, which passes to the south of Triangle Town Center, and the one on the west of Old Wake Forest Road, which passes towards the north to Ruritania Street and towards I-540. So here's the current designation. That teal, you can see with the white line in the middle, is the 4-lane divided avenue. And just to go back to the proposal, you can see that it currently makes sort of a large radius curve there. So a gentle curve, and the proposal is to have a bit of a tighter curve. And so that tighter curve would not be possible with the larger designation that exists today. You need a larger radius to accommodate a larger road making a turn. So it does, in order to make that turn, you do need the smaller right-of-way, the narrower right-of-way. So here you can see the aerial photography there. So Johnson Lexus is along the Capitol Boulevard frontage there. They have a number of facilities along the west side of Capitol Boulevard. And then along Old Wake Forest Road, there is a flex warehouse space, which is known as the Kennedy Space Center. And then there is, you can see, a new development coming online just south of the proposed segment. The zoning is industrial mixed use. You might remember this area from a rezoning case, I believe from 2 years ago. that was rezoned for that 7-story height. And that formerly held a single-family home and now has been cleared. Future land use map, sort of split between community mixed use and regional mixed use. This is in an urban form area as a growth center. Oh, looks like that image did not load properly. So what that image would have shown you is that this portion of Sumner Boulevard, essentially passing west from Capitol Boulevard, is projected or forecast by the year 2045 to have trip volumes of around 15,000 vehicles per day. That's according to the Triangle Regional Model. And that's the most recent iteration, which was completed in 2016. Oh, there it goes. So you can see that traffic count there, that 14,756. That's the forecast for 2045. And the reason that that is relevant is that in the comprehensive plan, we do have recommendations for the street designation that's appropriate for different traffic volumes. And so you can see there, 4-lane, as it's currently designated, is appropriate for 15,000 to 35,000, and then 3-lane is appropriate for 8,000 to 20,000. So there is a bit of overlap there. And so this particular street is a little bit off the low end for a 4-lane and is pretty well within the appropriate range for a 3-lane. And so you will, I'm sure, remember that the proposal is to redesignate to a 2-lane. And so just to clarify that a little bit, there are two, let me point out this language here that describes what a 3-lane street is. 1 lane in each direction with median or center turn lane. So in our street design manual in the city of Raleigh, we have 2 streets that meet that description. The 2-lane avenue divided, as you can see here. And so 1 lane in each direction and a median, and that, or excuse me, yes, the median can also serve as a center turn lane in this designation. And then the 3-lane with the parallel parking. So really the difference between those two is whether or not it has parallel parking. And typically you do see the parallel parking designation in more urban areas. So the case being is that it is largely within private property and that is not developed, and the street itself has not been built to date. There are not a whole lot of relevant policies. And given that the trip volumes that are forecast support the proposed designation, it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So I can take any questions.
Okay, questions for John?
So I didn't know we had a Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah, right. It's a fun name, right?
Your report said this proposed realignment would cut into Kenneth D. Kennedy's property. I assume that's the same Kennedy?
Yes, that's correct. And so you'll see in the report that essentially the impact for the development of the properties that this passes through is for these 3 parcels, which are owned by Johnson Lexus, or its parent company. It essentially moves the proposed street from the center of that tract, if those parcels were recombined, towards the edge, basically creating a larger single developable area. But then it also takes this portion, which goes across the edge of the Kennedy property, and pushes it more towards the center. And so what you end up with there is kind of the reverse situation, whereas before you had a single larger developable area, now you have 2 smaller developable areas. So they're, in that sense, somewhat of a positive impact for development for the Johnson Lexus property, somewhat of a negative impact on development, depending on what type of development you're looking at for the Kennedy property. And so in terms of policy consistency, it's a little bit of a wash, but a big factor is that the actual size of the right-of-way would be reduced if this was approved. And so that is less land that would be dedicated from either property if the street is built.
Have we heard from Mr. Kennedy?
I have heard from a representative of the Kennedy property, and that person was strongly opposed to this proposal.
Mr. Novak?
So the entire road between Old Wake Forest and US 1 will become 2-lane divided, or just this section that where we're taking out the 4-lane? I want to be.
It would be that entire length. So what you see here is that there is an existing built street, Barrow Drive, that is not to city standards. So if any of those parcels adjacent to that street were to redevelop, it would have to be improved to whatever the designation was on the street plan map. So in the existing street plan map, it would be improved to, or at least right-of-way dedicated and potentially fee in lieu paid for a 4-lane avenue divided. If the proposal is approved, then it would be a 2-lane avenue divided. And similar here, if these parcels develop, then the land would be dedicated and either fee in lieu paid or constructed street.
I think transportation staff can contradict me if I'm wrong, but the alignments that are shown on these maps are always somewhat conceptual and are typically worked out in greater detail when a development project comes in that implicates this right-of-way. I would probably pay more attention to the change in street section as being the more meaningful of the two changes, as opposed to the adjustment of the alignment, because that alignment probably, I mean, it'll give some more specificity, I think, based on what we have, but was probably not completely, could have been worked out. An alignment like that might have been able to be worked out and still be consistent with the connector shown. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, there are cases, good morning. There are cases where we have gone through and done functional designs. This happens to be one of them where we've actually done one, and the functional alignment that we've done does happen to comport with the version that the applicant is offering. And so John has characterized this correctly in terms of what some of the trade-offs would be relative to the parcels. Obviously, a lot of that depends upon how the parcels are all developed. We have talked to folks from both sides. Frankly, we're ambivalent about the alignment, to be honest with you. As long as there is a connective road from point A to point B, that's really the intent of what the comprehensive plan expresses. Now, when the alignment is shown touching various parcels, that does have an influencing factor on how we respond to those parcels relative to the site development process, absent a public project. And this is one of those situations where you may see a hodgepodge of private development building portions of the road and then having to come in us with some public investment to make the final linkages happen.
Okay. Thank you. Something else, Mr. Novak?
I was going to, just from Mr. Kennedy's perspective, if we can hear a little bit.
They may have that shortly.
Yes.
Well, yeah, we may have that opportunity. Anyone else for staff? Okay, we have an applicant in this case. To come forward, please.
Good morning again, David
morning
Brown,
again.
Withers Ravenel. We're here on behalf of Mr. Johnson, Johnson Lexus. He owns 5 parcels out there. I'm here with Attorney Tom Worth, and Luke Murray is also here to represent Mr. Kennedy. Staff has done a very thorough job detailing the request. I would also like to reiterate what Eric Lamb said. This is primarily about the road typology, from a 4-lane to a 2-lane. We've heard about the traffic volumes today and what's anticipated in the future, and that a 4-lane may not be indicated here, that the 2-lane would suffice. Essentially putting this on a road diet at the very beginning instead of after we've built it. There's been a couple of maps over the years, going back to 2001, where they literally said preliminary center line taken from City of Raleigh maps. The record is lost on where those maps are. We've been working with the Kennedy folks and with Luke, and we have pretty late breaking arrival of some new alignments. I don't know, John, if those managed to get loaded at the late hour.
I believe so. Let's take a look here. Do you mind grabbing your folders? Excuse me. See. I believe it's this one. Yeah. I need you for another minute. Technology. Can you just use that arrows? Okay.
What we have are just 4 quick exhibits. This map here shows the alignment that was presented to us. It's this piece here. We had one that was over here for a while, and I believe we'll go to the next screen. This was an interim one. This one had some issues for both properties. you see further evolution of the alignments. I'm just going to get right to this very quickly. This was something that we developed yesterday, so I'm going to give Mr. Murray a little bit of time to also speak to it. This would be an Avenue 2-lane. We believe the geometry is compliant with the city's design criteria. This is coming out of the Kennedy Space Center here. We're tying into Capitol Boulevard here, and the geometry in between we believe to be consistent. I think one key thing is the green dot right here in the middle. That is at the property line between Kennedy and Johnson, and I think more importantly, it is also lining up with there's a paper right-of-way right here, and I believe that was the launch point that they wanted us to hit. Again, leave that to let him speak to that. We have not taken this yet to the CAC. They do not meet in July. This would also be an August presentation. Just make ourselves available. I don't want to run out the clock. No, be respectful of time.
Okay, thank you. We'll stop the clock. We'll stop the clock on this one then. Any questions for Mr. Brown? Or perhaps Mr. Worth? Nope. Okay. So, anyone else who wishes to speak in support of this proposed comprehensive plan amendment? We have a little bit of time. Mr. Worth?
Tom Worth, Attorney, P.O. Box 1799, Raleigh 27602. I indeed filed the petition on May 24 in behalf of the Johnson interest. That filing was not sufficiently sensitive to the situation involving the undeveloped properties next door of Mr. Kennedy's. The insensitivity was obvious when we collaborated with those interests led by Mr. Luke Murray. Hence, we've come forward with a change proposal that we think will accommodate both while being consistent with the connectivity that the city desires from Capitol to Old Wake Forest Road. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else in support? Okay. And then again, you can stop the clock on this one. Thanks. And then the normal language is anyone speaking in opposition. So you may or may not have anyone speaking in opposition, but I understand that there's a representative of the Kennedy property. I think we'd like to hear from you. I'm not sure how we'll put you on the clock, but
So Luke Murray, I came today as an observer. Council couldn't be here for Mr. Kennedy, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. This does line up, or it's more in line with our intent. Little backstory on the property, you can see that Mr. Kennedy, in his forethought, this paper street was to take into consideration the Sumner Road extension at some point, direct right-of-way, plus the neighboring parcel when it was developed. This right-of-way was recorded years ago and missed by the city. And as such, you can see that these stub streets on the neighboring properties, which, by the way, that's fully developed at this point, that stub street runs directly into the back of one of Mr. Kennedy's properties. So it's really a mess. We're just trying to keep further mess from occurring. But this is more in line with what we'd like to see from a connectivity standpoint.
okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Murray? Okay. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been stressed several times that what we're really considering is replacing the 4-lane with a 2-lane. That's really the question, and it's not the alignment.
The way that the comprehensive plan amendment has been drafted, it is both. So if we have alignment with both parties on this new alignment, then the proposed alignment shown in the comp plan amendment needs to be disregarded or taken out of the case. But the fundamental issue overall is the roadway classification, and the Transportation Department is supportive of the request.
Okay, I'm asking that because since we're only seeing this map today, does that mean we should hold this until that's further clarified? Or I don't want to approve something that staff says, well actually we We haven't seen that.
No, we would be comfortable with this, and I did see this prior to the meeting.
Okay. And we don't have a CAC vote. We don't have to have a CAC vote. That is a courtesy. So we can hold this or move forward. Mr. Anagnos, was there something you wanted to? Oh, thank you. And we can take other questions. Wishes of the group.
So, Mr. Chair, I would like to hold it for a CAC vote. So if
Okay.
it's time to make a motion, I can do that.
Okay, sure.
All right. I'd like to
That's
make a
fine.
motion to hold this case. Oh, we've got conversation time after. Okay. Until what did we say the CAC meeting was?
The third week of August, if we could come back on the 27th.
Okay. Hold it until the 27th of August.
You're okay with that? Second.
A motion and a second to hold this till August 27th. Mr. Novak, something you were going to say?
When we hold this, will we come back and add the new design to this?
Well, as you can see here, the current comp plan alignment, slideshow from current side, the current alignment is actually fairly close to what's being shown here. So in that context, as I said, if we reach alignment on all the property owners, then the proposed portion of this part of the amendment should be withdrawn from the case or voted down by the commission.
The applicant has indicated they're willing to submit a revised application that would reflect this new alignment.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarification. That's good. Thank you very much. Anything else? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll hold that till August 27th. Thank you, folks. Now, comp plan amendment, CP 819, Ms. Ellis.
I think it's almost time to say good afternoon.
Really? We're getting close.
Not quite, so be quick.
Let me pull this. No, Sumner Boulevard. Okay. All right, so CP 819 Briar Creek Parkway. This is a city-initiated request to modify the street plan. And so it would be redesignating two different segments on Briar Creek, and we'll take a look at those in some subsequent slides. But the requested change from the city is to change Avenue 4-lane divided to Avenue 2-lane divided, and another segment from Avenue 6-lane divided to Avenue 4-lane divided. And the deadline for Planning Commission action is September 23rd, and this has not been to the CAC yet, to the Northwest CAC. However, on the agenda for meeting in July to give a presentation to them. So the request is showing two different segments, and I'll just highlight. This is the Avenue 6-lane divided currently is the first segment, and the request, where you see the red line, is to change the designation to Avenue 4-lane divided. The second portion is just this small segment in here. The request is to change that from Avenue 4-lane divided to Avenue 2-lane divided. Just to put some more context in what is being asked, the two street designations, 4-lane street would be 2 lanes in each direction with a median or center turn lane. The second 2-lane street designation would be actually, I believe it's 1 lane in each direction, different configurations. Be accurate for that. So the existing street plan looks fairly similar to what we just saw. However, it's saying that Avenue 6-lane divided is that first segment that we took a look at. Avenue 4-lane divided again is that second segment, and it goes up to the Durham County line, which is up in here. And part of the intent for this street plan amendment was to more closely match the Raleigh street plan designations with what was in Durham County. So the Durham County alignment that we see in here has a plan and a current build out of a Avenue 2-lane divided. So the intent was to match the designations so it didn't go from a larger street up here and then significantly narrow once it crossed the county lines. To give a little more perspective of what we're looking at, Durham County I have shaded in blue up at the top. So Durham County is bordering the areas that we are looking at right now. And again, our street plan segment under consideration for modification is that red line right there. Current zoning, just to add a little more context, there's a large planned development in the area as well as some office mixed use that's not currently built. And then as you get closer to Glenwood Avenue around the beginning of the street plan, proposed street plan amendment, it's some commercial mixed use. And it's generally mall type or retail type places with parking in front. Future land use map generally matches what the current zoning is. Regional mixed use matches where you saw that commercial mixed use designation near Glenwood Avenue. And then we see a handful of office and residential mixed use where the PD is sort of what you see in here, the planned development. And then there was also some parcels with office mixed use development that have not currently been built, but they have the entitlement. There's an urban form designation for the area that would suggest that density would be appropriate around here. And just to give some more context for what the street designations may look like, this is an example of an Avenue 2-lane divided, and then example of Avenue 6-lane divided. This request is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan, and the policies were generally things like coordinating transportation investments with land use. And again, I want to point out that Durham County, this amendment was brought forth because Durham County's designation for that road, Briar Creek, was 2-lane, and it would again remain 2-lane and then transition into a 4-lane. So similarly consistent with transportation in support of walkable neighborhoods, coordinating with the future land use and assessing changes in road designs. And there's no inconsistent policies for this. And no outstanding issues, and the deadline is September 23rd, 2019, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Ms. Ellis?
This 6-lane divided, does that exist in part there or not?
Our transportation colleague.
I'm sorry, could you clarify, please?
Where it's designated 6-lane divided now, is there a 6-lane divided road there now?
No, there's not. There is a footprint for 6-lane divided south of Glenwood Avenue. We did, much like we did New Falls and Newson Wakefield, a very wide right-of-way with a wide median that at such time we get to pull the trigger on widening to the 6 lanes, all the widening would come out of the median. This was developed separately from the bulk of Briar Creek as a different development, and as such was built as 4 lanes.
Okay, so we're not changing anything on the ground.
No, not for now. The NCDOT is working through a freeway conversion project for this portion of Glenwood Avenue that will build a bridge here carrying Briar Creek Parkway over US 70. That will be 4 lanes as part of the project. So this was part of this is initiated by our staff. It's part of our cleanup of the comp plan, going through periodically and looking at elements of the comprehensive plan. And given the changes over here, plus the changes with regards to what's taken place in Durham County, we felt like this was appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so city initiated, but we'll introduce opportunities for anyone from the public who wish to speak in favor of this. Unless Mr. Clem is coming down to speak in favor of this, I don't think so. Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Okay, bring it back here. We do not have a CAC vote on this.
So you're scheduled to go to the CAC. Why don't I'll move that we defer until you can do that. Which is August 13th, I guess?
Yeah, this will go to the CAC in the middle of July, so if you would like to defer to the first meeting in August, it will have been there for presentation.
All right, see if you can get a vote, Sarah.
At the same meeting?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm that powerful, but I can certainly ask.
Hopefully this is non-controversial enough. Anyway.
Okay, we have a motion to defer this to August 13th.
Second.
We have a second. Further discussion. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Okay. So then that brings us to Comp Plan Amendment CP 919.
All right.
Mr. Clem,
Yep.
welcome back.
Last one for you here. So this is also a staff-initiated amendment to the comprehensive plan, to the street plan, and it is to remove Du Bois Street from the map, which is not to say that anything will change about Du Bois Street. Those X's just show the designation is going away. And really, the purpose for doing this is NCDOT project that changes the interchange between Melbourne Road and 440 will actually close off the connection from Du Bois to Melbourne. The purpose of the street plan is to provide a connected grid of streets. And since this street is being disconnected from the grid, the classification of the neighborhood street is not necessary because it no longer serves as a higher level of network connectivity. Nothing will change with Du Bois Street. It will maintain its status as a city maintained street, so they will get all of the services of maintenance and repair. That doesn't change. So largely technical in nature. This shows one of the alternatives for the NCDOT plan. I didn't show the other one, but you can see here that Du Bois Street is closing. I'm not sure if you can quite see it here, but you may be able to see it on your computer. The gray that shows the existing street, it's hashed, which means that I believe it means it's going away. Anyway, Du Bois Street will be closed. This shows the new alignment of that interchange. Again, Du Bois Street will no longer serve as part of the critical network the street plan shows. And the reason that is happening is because this part of Melbourne Road is in the right-of-way for NCDOT's right-of-way, so they can do that. Again, Du Bois Street will stay there. It will just no longer be classified on this plan. There's your aerial view. It goes through this neighborhood. Zoning here, low density residential, and there's some RX there. Future land use map, low density, moderate density residential, connecting with some office and residential mixed use. Urban form, 440 is a parkway, not changing there. Consistent with the plan overall, there are no real policy implications here, but it is overall consistent with our vision themes of economic prosperity and equity, managing growth and green print Raleigh. It is expected with that road closure that these residents will experience lower traffic volume on their road because it no longer connects down to that interchange. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. The CAC has not voted. They will meet July 17th, maybe? Anyway, we're on the agenda for July, and we'll be there so we can come back in August for your vote as well.
Questions for Mr. Clem? Pretty straightforward.
No questions. I'm just going to make a motion to defer this case to the 13th of August meeting.
I have a motion and a second to defer to August 13th. Any further discussion?
Well, same suggestion that you try to get a vote. Tell them we asked you to.
Indeed.
I've been so directed by the Planning Commission. Okay, a motion in front of us. All in favor, aye. Aye, opposed? Okay, thank you. Moving on to minutes from our draft May 30th comp plan special session meeting minutes. Anyone?
Make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve, is there a second?
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, the comp plan special meeting from June 5th.
I make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And then our planning commission meeting minutes from June 11th.
I make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor, aye. Aye, opposed? And then finally, our draft June 2019 comp plan special session meeting minutes.
Make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Second by Ms. Hicks. All in favor, aye. Aye, opposed? Okay, thank you. Reports from the chair, a couple quick things. We have, at our first meeting in July, is when we elect officers for the new year. So we need to do that at this meeting. I'm going to hold that till the end of the meeting. And so we will explain that process at that time, and we'll elect officers for the next year. And I will also have some closing comments. But now I have nothing else to say at this time. Report from the members.
Mr. Chair, as part of the comp plan amendment update process, we looked at affordable housing and public realm aspects of the downtown plan, but we did not make the following two recommendations that I want to suggest that we make to City Council outside of the, their review of the update itself. As one of our planning staffers said, rather than bury these in the haystack, I would like to drop them on top. And these would be recommendations to City Council that it, and you have copies of this in front of you, so direct staff to develop a downtown-specific public realm and amenities plan, et cetera. And then direct staff to develop a downtown-specific plan for diverse and affordable housing, et cetera. And there's language that goes with both of these. Council can decide whether it wants to do these things or fold these things into other studies that it's making, but my purpose in offering these resolutions is to underline these two important aspects of comp planning, and especially downtown planning. I would say parenthetically, we heard something with the Bus application about public realm and amenities at that site, but we do not have, to my knowledge, a public realm and amenities plan downtown that would tell us whether we should have some sort of amenities at that site or not. And I think that we're getting development coming at us pretty quickly downtown, and we really ought to pay, I think City Council needs to pay very close attention to its policies about public realm, what's happening on the street, and also about affordable housing. So I'm going to move that we adopt this recommendation to City Council.
Can I
We,
just make sure I'm clear? This is separate from the this is, okay.
Yes.
okay, I'm going to ask about procedure, but we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Now we'll have some discussion. What would be, Mr. Bowers, our procedure for something like this? What do we do with this?
What would you do with it? It would go just as you're voting on the piece of paper, on the proposal from Mr. Geary, which is in writing, and that would appear on the report of Planning Commission at the next council meeting. And then council would do with it what they decided to do with it.
Okay, so this is not necessarily going forward with the comp plan review. This is something we're voting on today as just
It would be
food for thought.
we don't have a formal title for it because it doesn't, but
Yeah, and I would say that's just being strictly procedural, that there was no comp plan amendment on the agenda today that has to do with this item, so it's not, I'm trying to make sure we're clear on that this would be a separate, just, under your, I guess, general powers to advise council on land use and development matters in the city, that this would be something you would recommend. And I think what Ken said, putting it on the Planning Commission's report
yes,
would be probably the
yeah,
best way to do that.
as a freestanding item, with that as the backup.
Okay? Any other comment?
I'll support going forward with it. Did we get a motion in a second? I think
We do
did.
have it, yes.
Okay, all right.
I have a question. Is there a reason or a preference why we didn't maybe discuss this in strategic planning or some sort of subcommittee where we could build some consensus as a commission? I feel like I'm catching up a little bit, so I apologize.
That's at the discretion of the commission. If you wish to hold on to the item and deliberate further, either with a full commission or in a committee, that would be an alternative to acting on it now.
That's so, Tika, I think that would be an alternative route for this. This comes out of our, for me, it comes out of our analysis of the comp plan and the update. Had I fashioned these a little bit earlier in that process, they probably would be or I would have attempted to get them in the comp plan update review as action items. It was suggested to me when I brought them up at the last meeting that it was a little late in the process to be adding new action items, and I agree with that. So, Chair called this food for thought for City Council. I think that's exactly the way I intend it, food for thought. These are important subjects they should study, in my opinion, and hopefully in our opinion. They can study them or not. The City Council makes its own decisions. I don't see really any benefit to going to strategic plan on this. We just went through a detailed analysis of the comp plan, and these are the two things that popped out to me as needing to be put on the top of the haystack. So that's why I'm bringing it forward in this fashion.
I think that makes sense. And I do think we did have extensive conversation about these particular topics. I do think as we move forward, it's, important that we have the opportunity to build consensus on things that go before the council, just so that we can really support them strongly. And I do support this.
Yeah, and I do feel like we had enough conversation, and especially the last special meeting, to actually support going forward with it, at least from my perspective. And I think most of us that are sitting here today were actually at that special meeting, so we'll have a feeling for whether everyone else has that consensus.
I hesitate to question your wording, Mr. Geary, because you're the word agent. But there are two ways one might read the second sentence in item 1. The plan should include incentives for new high-density private developments that exceed required minimums. That could be high-density private developments that exceed required minimums, or it could be the plan should include incentives that exceed required minimums for high-intensity developments. I think you mean that if there's a high-intensity development, there should be incentives to exceed the minimums, but it doesn't quite read that way, and I'm reluctant to go to council with.
Well, I went back and forth on the word "that" could be read as "to." The plan should include incentives if a new high-density private development exceeds required minimums, et cetera. So incentives to do it, and then incentives if they do it.
Well, now I'm confused, because you're saying if the development exceeds the required minimums?
If we have a development proposal that comes in and offers open space in excess of required minimums, or public amenity space in excess of required minimums, we would plan, the purpose of this planning would be to have some incentives in place to say, since you've done that, here's what you get in return. You get a little more height, you get a little more whatever. You get more of something that you will ask for in the application that you're justifying or encouraging us to approve by offering more than required minimums in other areas.
For what it's worth, Mr. Chairman, I have the same thing underlined on my copy here, that I was a little unclear of exactly where this was going, and it was, again, I'm not a linguistic giant or anything, but I just I think that it was confusing enough that I'd like for it to have a greater level of clarity.
Yeah.
We're talking about something of this level, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and I guess I'm hearing if they're already offering to exceed the minimum, why then would we provide incentives? Seems like we'd provide the incentives to encourage them to exceed the minimum. So I'm not sure where the cart and the horse exist in this.
Well, right, because we have this voluntary process, the cart and the horse come forward together, but I'm happy to change the word "that" to the word "to." The plan should include incentives for new high-density private developments to exceed required minimums. offer the developer some incentive to exceed required minimums.
Thank you, that makes more sense to me. Mr. Novak, does that help you?
I'm still pondering.
You're pondering, yes. Michelle?
Not to wordsmith Mr. Gary, but would it be after minimums in exchange for? I don't know if that's.
Well, I think the lawyers would tell us we can't say in exchange for, right? We're incenting them. I'd be happy to say in exchange for, but I think I'd get in legal trouble there, wouldn't I?
I wasn't looking at what part of the 1, 2.
1.
Second sentence.
Is this a thing that you've envisioned would be codified in the UDO as like a by right option if you set aside an extra X percent of your site for open space, you can have this many additional stories, or is this something that would be negotiated through rezoning?
See, I think that's what the study would look at. My answer is the former, but council's answer might be the latter, or it might be something else completely. I think what we need is a study of how to get developers to include open space amenities, public amenities in excess of code, and how do we do that? And that's what they would study.
I don't think this is the prescription, is what you're saying. This is not what we're telling them to.
I'm not telling them how to do it.
Right,
I'm telling
yeah.
them this is something that hopefully we think they should take a long, hard look at. Because well, I mean, not to belabor a point, but we're getting a lot of applications for very tall buildings with very few amenities. And so how would we incent the applicant to do more than the minimum?
Okay. The second item, I know this is downtown specific, but how does this vary from what the city is already trying to shape in terms of affordable housing strategies and policies? Is it the downtown specific part, the 60% AMI part, or are we just trying to reinforce that pay attention to downtown when you're looking at affordable housing? Not to minimize that, but what does this gain us?
Well, again, we're asking developers to offer us voluntary conditions. We had one today that did. We've had several that have not. And I think City Council I think that a majority of City Council would like these to be offered, but it has not really laid out a plan for strong incentives for developers to offer them. The how of affordable housing tends to be answered by our applicants saying we'd love to, but we don't know how. So this study would suggest, would address the question of how and what incentives are there for you to include.
Would you be willing to once again, change that to the word to? Second sentence?
Yes, two.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, ma'am. Anything?
No, I was just going
No?
to say, you might want to clarify that you're recommending that they have staff study, I don't see that in, but it's
This-
whatever you guys want to recommend. This is really not.
Well, this is, both resolutions say council would direct staff to study or direct staff to develop a plan. Guess first you study, then you develop a plan.
Recommend, you don't say recommend or study.
Is it just a point for me reading this, because the comment earlier today was when you're talking about AMI, it's normally talking about the 80%, and that's normally the ceiling on it. So what I'm reading in this is discussing all other AMI levels as being viable to an affordable housing plan, because that's the section that seems to be not represented or considered. So that's how I'm reading your statement.
I base that language on other language that's in the comp plan update, that we talk about 60% of AMI and below. So below meaning 40, 30. But again, this is, council will direct staff to develop a plan, and staff will, if they do this.
Well, they can, yes, that's exactly right. They
If
do
they
not have to
do
accept this.
Staff will develop a plan.
Yeah, we are offering, we're putting this to the council. They can take it or leave it.
Right.
So anything else? What are the wishes of the group then? This would be as part of the commission report next Tuesday. In addition to updating on our votes, we would provide this to the council as a commission recommendations.
I'll just restate that I'm willing to send it forward with my support, and City Council can choose to take it up or choose to ask staff to take it up or not. So I'm okay with going that far.
Okay. Did we actually started with a motion on this?
I made this
So we
as a
have the motion and
so
the second in place.
I got a second down
All
there.
right, so any further discussion, as modified, any further discussions? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we'll add this to the commission's report for next week. So, report from the planning director.
Coming up. So, last council meeting was on June 18th, and the city council acted on the following cases. TC 219 design adjustments, text change was approved. 6 items scheduled for public hearing on July 2nd. Z319 Harrington Street and P Street. Z3518 Pollock Place, TCZ 119 Spring Forest Road, TC1C18 Omnibus text change on processes and procedures, CP419 Oak Forest Road. Public hearing for Z419 on Freedom Drive was continued to July 2nd. Public hearing for Z3618 West Martin Street was closed, and the case has been deferred till July 2nd for further discussion. The public hearing for Z2518 Lead Mine Road was continued to September 18th, and the case remains in the Growth and Natural Resources Committee. And CP2B19 Coordinating Land Use and Transportation was scheduled for public hearing on September 3rd.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ken about the report? Okay, great. Well, moving on to pending items. Yes.
Sorry.
That's fine. So it's just handed out a small thank you for all the extra work we've done this spring in the comprehensive plan update. Something to remember our time together by. And should you not wish to remember it, you now have a frame and a tote bag. You can do with what you will. Yeah.
Having not looked, I don't know if this is
Thank
a
you
real
to everybody.
big,
Yes.
I don't know if this is a real big debit card or if it's a
Nope.
group photo. I'm just waiting to be surprised later.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Upcoming items, we meet Thursday, Committee of the Whole. We got a couple of items at least on the agenda for that. And now let us, unless there's something else, let's move to the election of new officers who will assume duty July 1st. Normally, this would be the first meeting of the new year, but in lieu of waiting until August to figure this out, I'd like to do this now, particularly since this is actually my last week as commission member. So we'll start with chair, and we'll take nominations from the floor.
Mr. Chair, I want to nominate Edie Jeffries for chair.
Okay. Ms. Jeffries has been nominated. Any other nominations? Okay. Then let us, anyone would like to suggest that we accept her nomination by acclamation?
So move. Did you move? I second that.
Okay. All right, so it's been moved and seconded to accept G.D. Jeffries. Let the record show. I've made it so far. That's the first time I've called you G.D. Ms. Jeffries to be chair of the new commission. All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Well, by acclamation, there'll be no no's. Okay, chair-elect. We'll accept nominations for chair-elect.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend Tika Hicks for that position.
Okay. Ms. Hicks has been nominated
Position as chair-elect?
for, no, vice chair.
Vice chair,
I'm sorry,
vice chair.
I used the term chair-elect inappropriately for vice chair.
That's what it was, that's what I hesitated about.
For Ms., thank you for correcting me. It's still to the last minute, I need help. Any other nominations? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, Ms. Hicks. We also have a secretary position which needs to be filled. It is somewhat nominal as Janitha does our record keeping, but it is nonetheless in our bylaws that we have a secretary, Ms. Jeffries. What shall I call you now? I could accuse it again. Edie has been taking care of that responsibility for us. So we would like to have a secretary. So I'd like to nominate one.
I'd like to nominate Bob Geary, the wordsmith, as our secretary.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I will not be wordsmithing anything, but I will read the minutes.
Yeah, part of the duty is to read the minutes and be sure that Edie's name is spelled
That's
correctly.
right, that's right.
One of the consistently. Anyone else wish to volunteer or be nominated for secretary? In that case, all in favor say aye. For Mr. Geary? Aye. Okay, great. Now, a couple of things, prerogative of a chair who is leaving the position. First, I really want to thank our staff attorney. It's been a pleasure that we've had a staff attorney again. We went too long without one. It's great having you at the table. Janitha, it's great that you were here. You've always been so supportive. Appreciate that. And I want to thank all of the planning staff, both present and past, who have worked with me over the 6 years very patiently as I've sort of worked through trying to understand the job that we all have to do. And it's, I think our staff does a wonderful job. And I'm really appreciative of the support that they give us to help us be successful at a very challenging job. I also want to thank my fellow commissioners, again, present and past. I've worked with a lot of really good people. It's great that people are willing to give the time that is required of us, even on a day like today when we're into the afternoon, to do this job. It's a big deal. It matters to our city that we do this, and I'm grateful to have served with all of you. So with that, I'm just delighted to have survived my 6 years, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be your chair, because that has been a real pleasure.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say you did more than survive the 6 years, and to thank you very much for your thoughtful leadership during your tenure as chair and also as a commissioner. You will be sorely missed and big shoes to fill. It's true. Good luck.
Yeah, I know, really. I will definitely not be as eloquent as our current chair, so I really appreciate your setting a model for me, and I hope I can live up to it. Okay. But I also want to say how much I appreciate your mentorship and being here for us, so thank you for the work you've done on this planning commission.
Well said, and I would concur, and it's been a real pleasure, and we'll miss you.
Well, thank you.
And the same, and as one of the newer members, it's, we have a good tenor on this body, and I think it's not all because of Rod Swink, but that's he's made a big contribution to that, so that's very welcome to me.
All right, then we stand adjourned.